Chapter 365. Gior Chapter 345. Opportunity. Dressed in a luxurious formal attire, the fur lapel at the side of his neck was trimmed with gold. Even the cuffs were decorated with a circle of gaudy wavy patterns. Under a wide, colorful ribbon on his chest, there was a gorgeous emblem designed by heraldic expert. The silver-haired Hughes stood in front of the mirror for a while in such luxurious attire. Then, he put on his top hat with satisfaction. A colorful feather was inserted behind the brim of his hat. The only flaw was that he couldn't get a real phoenix feather for the feather. A real phoenix feather was something that could only be found by chance. According to legend, only the lord of the holy city of Babylon had it. Only the ancient nobles had such a sacred item. Even the hat worn by the Emperor of Byzantium did not have a real phoenix feather. He only used a flamingo feather as a replacement. As for Hughes, it was obvious that those were peacock feathers that had been meticulously decorated and dyed. Standing in front of the mirror, Governor Hughes, the future King Hughes, one hand on his waist and the other on his sword, assumed a very upright posture. Sitting in front of him were 3 court painters. In front of them were a huge drawing board and paint. They were nervously painting. Such a portrait was said to be hung in the main hall of the future king's palace. The leader of the rebel army appeared to be in a good mood at the moment. At the very least, the haze brought by the news of the 2 princesses escaping from the governor's palace had dissipated. This was still the rebel army camp under the city of Osgiliath. Naturally, the commander's tent could not be casually set up like an ordinary general's tent. In fact, Hughes's tent could be said to be a temporary mobile palace. The craftsmen of Armenia used more than 60 specially designed carriages to bring materials and pre-designed various kinds of wood to temporarily put together a small palace-like structure. It was 2 stories high and there was a watchtower on top of it. This temporary mobile palace could fit hundreds of people, and there was still plenty to go around. Although the siege of the city was still in a state of anxiety, Hughes did not appear to be too anxious these days. At least, he did not appear to be anxious. Salvatore also acted like the chairman of the Red Round Table. Every day, he would visit the military camps of the rebel army and talk to the leaders or commanders of the rebel army. He made all kinds of deals in private. It was even said that 2 military regions in the south had joined the rebel army alliance. This was all due to Salvatore's efforts. Hughes, on the other hand, didn't seem to make any moves. He didn't deliberately try to rope in any of the military governors, nor did he offer any conditions. He just spent every day wasting time, as Salvador put it, in his gorgeous palace. Although they had yet to conquer Osgiliath, Hughes had already ordered his men to design a new palace. He began to discuss the different decorations of the new palace with a group of artists. He even found a group of scholars to design a new genealogical emblem and totem for his future royal family. It was said that a new set of royal etiquette had already been designed. Our multi-talented, noble governor even designed a brand new court dance in person. After doing so many ridiculous things, Hughes seemed to lack a sense of responsibility towards military affairs. Even the main force of the attack was replaced by the rebel army of the Pro-Salvato faction. The entire rebel army of the military districts of Armenia had retreated to the rear of the rebel army camp. At this time, the military districts of Armenia were somewhat dissatisfied with the governor's actions. Some people even made some unpleasant comments. Does the governor think that the matter is settled? We haven't set foot in the Osgiliath palace yet. Even if victory is firmly in our hands, it's only a matter of time. But for the future position in the rebel army alliance, the governor has to pull himself together. But over the past few days, all the loyal subordinates had been blocked by Hughes. Seeing the governor with those heraldry experts, etiquette experts, and even court dancers and tailors every day, the subordinates didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Hughes only responded positively to the concerns of his subordinate. It was only one sentence. "What's the hurry? The time isn't right." That night, as Hughes posed and let the three painters work hard to record his heroic image onto the drawing board, outside the palace, the hurried beating of the war drums gradually subsided. Hughes yawned and looked at the hourglass in the room. He muttered, "The attacking army has retreated again. Whose army is it this time? Is it old Rozak from the northwest or Denar, Salvador's pug? Humph." His face was smeared with a thick layer of powder, making him appear abnormally pale, but this was considered the most standard complexion of a noble. There was even a mole at the corner of his mouth. He wore a curly wig on his head. Even his eyes were covered with thick eyeliner. Sir Hughes was indeed a fanatical fan of noble culture. He listened for a moment to the sound of the war drums gradually subsiding. He also heard the faint sighs of disappointment from the tens of thousands of attacking soldiers as they retreated. "Perhaps we'll stop here for tonight. It's almost dawn," Hughes muttered. "Those fellows in the city can really endure. Humph, with the support of those damned Lantis people, they aren't afraid of starving. God bless, let a great storm come to the sea." Hughes looked at the exhausted painters and finally relaxed. "All right, gentlemen. Let's stop here for tonight. I still have to discuss the color of the robes with those lovely scholars." The painters quickly put away their drawing boards and bowed as they left. At any rate, creating portraits for important people was always a long process. Hughes walked away from the mirror. As he was about to take off the large, gorgeous hat on his head, a deep and solemn voice suddenly came from the window. The voice was faint. However, when the voice entered Hughes' ears, Hughes' face twisted. He abruptly jumped up and threw the hat in his hand to the ground. Then, like a madman, he rushed to the window. Pushing open the window, he looked in the direction of Osgilla from afar. Under the curtain of night, the attacking army had just retreated. In the wilderness, it was as though a swarm of black ants were retreating toward the rebel army camp. In the distance, the defense of Osgilla's city was still like a cold mountain. The majestic arch of triumph stood tall and countless banners fluttered in the wind. In the darkness of the night, it appeared even more solemn and filled with killing intent. However, that was not the most important thing. Hughes clung onto the windowsill tightly and stared in the direction of the silent city walls. He waited anxiously, hoping that the voice he had heard earlier wasn't an illusion. Finally, heaven seemed to have heard Hughes's prayer. The deep and solemn sound of the bell rang out once more. This time, the sound of the bell was louder than before. It was as though the bell was ringing from different places within Osgilla. The sound of the bell coming from every direction was gathered together by the night wind. Then, the sound drifted far away into the night. The sound of the bell was deep and solemn, so heavy that it made it hard for them to breathe. Hughes leaned on the windowsill, his fingers trembling. He tried his best to keep a straight face as he tilted his ears. Once, twice, 13 times. Although he was trying his best to remain calm, the muscles at the corners of his eyes were twitching rapidly. Finally, when the sound of the bell ended, Hughes felt as though all the strength within his body had been sucked out. He fell down from the windowsill onto the ground. 28 times. 28 times. Not one more, not one less. 28 times. Hughes's heart thumped wildly. Dead. Dead. Emperor Cantos is dead. This is the death knell. This is the death knell of the imperial family. 28 times, not one more, not one less. Only when the emperor has passed away can the bell be rung so many times. I have spent my entire life studying the imperial family's etiquette. I will never forget it. At that moment, several of the personal guards outside the door heard the commotion and ran in. Seeing the governor sitting on the ground, they quickly moved forward to help him up. However, Hughes shook off the people around him. Suddenly, he jumped up with an unexpectedly agile posture. He grabbed one of the guards and said, "Did you hear that clearly? Is it not the bell? Is it not the bell?" The guard was dumbfounded. He shook his head and stammered, "Sir, yes, yes." Hughes had already let go of him and grabbed another person. Was it 28 times? Is it not 28 times? This time, without waiting for his subordinate to answer, Hughes released him again. Then, this noble governor looked up to the sky and laughed maniacally. Ha 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 ha! I've been waiting! I've finally been waiting! I've been waiting! He laughed so hard that the expression on his face was distorted, making him look exceptionally ferocious. Wu Ran pushed the guard beside him away. His eyes were bloodshot as he shouted sternly, "Pass down the order! All the regimental officers are to have a military meeting immediately. Go, go!" Some of the guards were stunned. Seeing the governor lose his composure, a fellow who was usually favored by the governor thought himself clever and suggested, "Sir, it's already so late. Many of the generals are already asleep. There's nothing much to do at night. Why don't we wait until tomorrow morning?" Before this person could finish speaking, Hughes had already given him a slap with bloodshot eyes. With a crisp slap, the person who spoke fell to the ground. Hughes was already gnashing his teeth, his face full of murderous intent. "Release the hourglass. I don't care what method you use. Even if you're in bed, drag them out. Pass down the order. If the hourglass is not paid, I'll peel off your skin and scram out of my camp to fend for yourselves." Seeing how excited the governor was, everyone could feel the evil fire burning within him. No one dared to say anything at this point in time. They quickly ran out like a swarm of bees. Even the one who was covering his mouth on the ground stumbled and crawled out with the rest. This chaos instantly caused chaos in the Armenian rebel camp. To be honest, the Armenian rebel army was well equipped and well trained. They were considered a strong army. But the problem was that Hughes, as the boss, had been putting on a slack attitude these days. He looked like he didn't want to make progress, which made the people below him feel relaxed. Since their own army did not need to attack the city, they might as well hide at the back and enjoy themselves. They still maintained their daily exercises and did not care about anything else. Even the officers went to bed early in the evening to rest. The world would belong to you, Hughes. As the leader, Hughes, if you're not anxious, why should we be? When Hughes suddenly issued such an urgent order at night, the entire camp was thrown into chaos. Quite a number of officers had already fallen asleep, and some had even drunk some wine. When they were dragged out of their beds in a drunken state, they even had some small scuffles with some of the guards. However, when the urgent drumming was heard, these officers began to panic. They searched for armor, put on clothes, searched for boots, and led their horses. It was all a mess. Fortunately, the original quality was still there. After the chaos, before the hourglass in Hughes's palace ran out, everyone was finally gathered. The Armenian army, at this moment, had reached close to 60,000 soldiers in the rebel camp, and they were considered the strongest force in the rebel camp. The high-ranking officers gathered in Hughes's palace were all at the emblem group level. There were about 20 to 30 of them. In the meeting hall, Hughes had already changed into his military uniform. He put on his armor and a long sword hung on his waist. His military boots were also polished until they shone. Looking at the officers who had gathered below, the atmosphere in the meeting hall was solemn. "You must all think that I've been muddle-headed recently. Many of you have said behind my back that I've lost my drive, and that I'm ridiculous." When Hughes threw out his first sentence, his tone was stiff. Instantly, many of the officers' expressions changed. However, Hughes laughed loudly and shouted, "Now I can tell you that I haven't changed. I haven't aged, I haven't become muddle-headed, and I haven't lost my drive. I've been doing things these days because I've been waiting for an opportunity. Waiting for an opportunity to settle the situation in one fell swoop. Others are attacking the city, but I'm forcing everyone to retreat. It's not because I'm weak, but because I need my soldiers to maintain enough energy and combat power. Only when this moment comes can we seize this fleeting opportunity." Looking at the officers who were still looking at each other, Hughes laughed coldly. "Byzantium Emperor Cantos is dead. Boom. This sentence was earth-shattering. Instantly, everyone's expressions changed. No matter how much they tried to hold it in, there was still a small commotion in the meeting hall. The Byzantium Emperor was dead? That Kanto's Qigong Emperor was really dead? Although everyone was openly rebelling, they had all lived under the banner of Byzantium for most of their lives. As Byzantium people, their reverence for the emperor was deeply engraved in their bones. Even though they were rebels, hearing the news of the emperor's death still brought a lot of shock to everyone. Everyone quiet down. Hughes glared and shouted. Only then did the people below straighten their back. Some of the more quick-witted ones were already glaring at their leader, showing signs of eagerness. This news I just found out. Humph. The pitiful leaders of the other allied forces, I'm afraid they won't be able to react until daybreak. This is our chance. Some of the officers immediately shouted excitedly. Your Majesty! The Byzantium Emperor is dead. Your Majesty wants to lead us to seize the opportunity to attack the city and take down Osgilla. This question immediately attracted the agreement of many people. In a moment, everyone was rubbing their palms together, looking excited. Yes. The Emperor has passed away, the city must be in chaos. Let's seize the opportunity to attack the city. Before the other battalions can react, Osgilla is already ours. Let's kill our way into Osgilla. Seeing the eagerness of the officers below, Hughes nodded in his heart. Although these subordinates had been lax for a few days, their desire to fight was still there. He waved his hand and stood on top. His eyes swept across the crowd. Who said we are going to Osgilla? Officers. Everyone looked at each other, puzzled. The enemy's emperor had suddenly passed away. It was a good opportunity for internal chaos. If they took the opportunity to attack the city now, they would have a high chance of taking down the city in one fell swoop. Adrik is a famous general of the empire. Even if the emperor has passed away, the city's defense is still in his hands. Even if we launch a surprise attack, the chances of success may not be very high. Hughes frowned. Moreover, Osgilla's defense. Thinking about the defenses of this city of miracles, the #1 city on the continent, the tens of meters high city walls, the numerous arrow towers, and the dense number of ballistic cannons, many of the generals felt their hair stand on end. This Osgilla's defense was indeed terrifying. They had gathered hundreds of thousands of rebel soldiers and spent 2 months, but they had not been able to achieve much. In these 2 months, everyone had been sacrificing their own lives. We will head northwest. Hughes's face sank and he sneered. Northwest? The officers were stunned. Then, some of the smarter ones revealed looks of realization. Northwest, northwest. Northwest is not the Roadrear cavalry? Since Emperor Kantos has passed away, the only successor to the empire's throne is that Crown Prince Garcia. Garcia is within the Roadrear cavalry. I will lead you to launch a surprise attack in the middle of the night. My 60,000 tigers will head straight for the Roadrear cavalry's encampment. We will launch a sneak attack in the middle of the night. The enemy will never expect us to come so suddenly. Additionally, they must have received the news of the Emperor's death. Add to that the advantage in numbers. As long as we can defeat the Roadrear cavalry in one go. Hughes waved his hand in the air, clenched his fist and shouted. I don't want Garcia. If he is alive, I want to see him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse. The old emperor is dead. If we can get rid of the crown prince. Even if the city of Osgilla is 100 meters high. Even if Audiobook is the reincarnation of the Duke of the Tulip family, this situation can never be reversed. Defeat the Roadrear cavalry and kill Garcia. Osgilla, surrender without a fight. I need recommendation ticket. Please help me. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 366. GOR Chapter 346 So-called belief, 7,000 words. Absolutely impossible. Within the tent, Ruhr's face was filled with rage. He furiously threw his gloves onto the table and used both hands to support himself. He gritted his teeth and said, "Your Highness, do you know that this order will only drag our army into a dead end?" Standing before Ruhr was the Imperial Crown Prince, Garcia, who was also in military attire. Beneath the helmet, his face was cold and his golden hair was meticulously pressed down on his eyebrows, making his face appear particularly gloomy. He said, "I know. The 13th Corps consists of mounted soldiers." Ruhr took a deep breath as he attempted to suppress the rage within his heart. He slowed down his words and said in a heavy tone, "Mounted soldiers are most useful in field battles. Once they enter the city, mounted soldiers are even less useful than infantry soldiers. The 13th Corps can only achieve the greatest effect of restraining the rebel army by staying outside the city for field battles. However, once they enter the city, they are even less useful than an ordinary infantry soldier. I know that as well. Your request is the same as ordering me to cut off the legs of my own mounted soldiers." Ruhr shouted loudly. "No matter what, I cannot accept this request of yours. Although you are the Crown Prince, I am the General of the 13th Corps that His Majesty has personally appointed. Your Highness, you only have the title of observer. You do not have the authority to control me." For him to say such words to the future emperor, it was clear that Ruhr had thrown caution to the wind. Outside, the winds howled. For some unknown reason, tonight's wind and thunder were particularly frightening. It was as though a storm was about to arrive on this summer night. Garcia's face was cold as he stared intently at Ruhr. Ruhr felt his hair stand on end as he was stared at by the Crown Prince. However, he straightened his neck and said, "Your Highness, regarding whether or not to enter the city, we have already discussed this when we arrived. According to the current situation, our best choice is to stay outside the city and seek for opportunities. Back then, you also tacitly agreed to this decision." The Crown Prince's gaze didn't waver at all. He finally nodded and retrieved a scroll from his bosom. He gently placed it in front of Ruhr. Ruhr took a look and raised his eyebrows. Sent from the city? He naturally knew that even though this Crown Prince was in his own army, he was still the Empire's Crown Prince after all. He naturally had his own channels of communication with the city. With that, Ruhr opened the scroll and quickly read through it. Fatso's expression immediately changed. He quickly placed his hand on the table to support himself so that he wouldn't stagger. This scroll was not a transfer order, but a reward order. The contents of the reward order didn't seem to have anything to do with Ruhr. The Emperor had ordered the Empire's Prime Minister, Salambanili, to be rewarded. At the same time, the Salambanilis' Salamu family was lavishly rewarded. The richness of the reward was so great that it left one tongue-tied. It was as though the Emperor wished that he could give half of the authority of the entire central government to the Salambanili family. Under normal circumstances, there was absolutely no emperor who would reward any of his subordinates so crazily. Ruhr's expression changed quickly after he read through the reward order. He was first shocked, but soon after, the intelligent Fatso's eyes flashed with a trace of understanding. He lifted his eyelids and glanced at Garcia. He saw that the Crown Prince's expression was stern and he didn't seem to be angry at all. No matter what, he was the future ruler of the empire. However, the current emperor actually gave half of his authority to another subject, and this future emperor wasn't angry at all? Powerful subject? Entrusting him to me. This was entrusting him to me. This thought flashed through Ruhr's mind like lightning. It was entrusting him to me, and he was deliberately raising up Salambanili. What was the reason? What was the reason? Balance. Fatso spat out those words. When his face sank again, He looked at the Crown Prince with a much more solemn expression. The anger and annoyance from before had completely faded away. However, there was still a trace of unwillingness hidden within. "I understand." Roar's face twitched. "We will do as your Highness says. The entire army, immediately attack and enter the city." He clenched his fists tightly, feeling as though his heart was bleeding. "Even if the Roadrear Knights have to bleed to the last drop of blood, we will protect your Highness and enter the city." This was a helpless choice. Or rather, Roar simply had no choice. He clearly knew that strategically speaking, it was extremely foolish for the cavalry to give up on a field battle and enter the city. He clearly knew that if the army suddenly charged into the rebel army's defensive line and entered the city, the army would suffer great losses. However, he had to do this. Since this reward order was bestowed upon Prime Minister Salambanili by the Emperor, why would it be sent out of the city and into the hands of the Crown Prince? It was very simple. This was a signal. The old Emperor was clearly telling his son, "I am dying. I have already entrusted him to Salambanili." Additionally, through this reward order, the old Emperor did not even need to say a word. He had already hinted his future strategy to his son: promote Salambanili to balance out Adrik, who was in charge of the army. There was no need for a will, no need for a word. Just the transfer of this reward order was enough to explain everything. More importantly, Roar also understood that he had no choice but to enter the city. Since the Emperor had already entrusted him, it meant that the Emperor was dying. It was even possible that the Emperor was already, once Emperor Cantos passed away, the morale of the army would be shaken. At a time like this, Garcia must enter the city. He must enter the city to be crowned. This was a problem that had no choice. If Garcia could not enter the city, without the Emperor, the morale of the army would be shaken and Osgilla would have a hard time defending the city. If there was no Emperor in the city, then it was possible that those with ulterior motives would. No matter what, Garcia must enter the city. And immediately. There was no choice. Fatso's heart seemed to be on fire. He angrily rushed out of the tent and roared, "Sound the drums and bugles! Prepare the army! All officers are to gather. In less than an hour, you will be dealt with according to military law." Heavy drums and bugles rang out. The camp, which had been rather quiet, was suddenly in an uproar. Countless soldiers rushed out of their tents and quickly put on their armor and weapons. The cavalry squires brought their war horses over, and the auxiliary soldiers carried all the heavy military equipment and ran back and forth. The sound of Xiao Zhao's boots could be heard as one officer after another rushed into the camp. Although it was an emergency summon, they were still the Roadrear cavalry, the Iron Army of the Empire. Not a single one of these officers appeared wretched. Instead, their faces were filled with vigilance and excitement. Roar turned around and ran up the platform. Seeing that all the officers had arrived, Fatso took a deep breath and said, "I have no time to explain things to you all. Tonight, the entire army will launch a surprise attack on the rebel army. We enter the city." The moment he said that, the faces of everyone in the tent changed. Some of the officers could not help but shout out, "General, isn't this too hasty? Even if we are going to enter the city, we should give the soldiers some time to prepare. The war horses have yet to reach their full potential and the army needs to be reorganized." "That is right, General. There is also the plan for our advance. We need to plan it thoroughly. Which division will attack first and which will be the last? To give such a sudden order." Roar's face was gloomy as he looked at these officers. Suddenly, he shouted, "All of you, shut up!" He tore off his helmet and threw it on the ground. His face was filled with murderous intent. "I don't care about what you all said. I only have one order now. Go and reorganize your men immediately. In 15 minutes we will set off. Throw away all the supplies and fodder." "Sir." A brave officer stepped forward. Judging by his appearance, he seemed to be an emblem regiment-level officer. He raised his head to look at Roar and said loudly, "Even if we are going to enter the city, we should make a plan before we act. To enter the city, we need to break through the rebel army's defensive line. This is not a small matter. If we are not careful, our entire army may be surrounded by the enemy. The best way is after we have reorganized, we will press forward with our entire army and march towards the rebel army's defensive line in an oppressive manner to lure them out for a field battle. As long as we can defeat one or two rebel armies and wait for them to scatter and open a path for us, we will be able to pass through calmly. Just like the first battle we fought when we first arrived here. You have given such a rash order and disregarded everything. Suddenly, you want everyone to abandon all the supplies and set off in the middle of the night. Without a battle plan and meticulous arrangements." The officer showed a hint of dissatisfaction. "Even the cavalry of our main emblem regiment can charge through. But what about the logistics and auxiliary battalions? 3 auxiliary battalions have more than 1,000 people. They are not cavalry and can't charge in recklessly with us. Are we going to abandon all of them here?" The fat on Roar's face trembled violently. He clenched his teeth, but did not look at the officer who spoke. Instead, he turned his head and glared at the Crown Prince. His eyes were about to spit fire. Seeing the general's expression, a few high-ranking officers were slightly shocked. Another officer stepped forward. It was the chief quartermaster of the army. "Sir." This chief quartermaster was an old member of the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment. He had been serving in the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment since Adric's era. His seniority was also very high. Even when Roar spoke to him, he was exceptionally respectful and courteous. At this moment, when the old quartermaster spoke up, Roar took a deep breath and retracted the anger on his face. He looked at him and said, "Please speak." "Sir, we have been stationed here for a month now. Our food supplies have been replenished locally. The supplies that we brought with us have been depleted. When we first arrived here, we still had 30,000 warhorses. But now we have less than 20,000. Last month, the soldiers were still able to receive 80% of their rations daily. This month, it has been reduced to 60%. Our fighting strength isn't in a good state right now. It can be said that our soldiers have been enduring for more than a month. Every day they can only eat half full. Everyone is clenching their teeth and persevering because we are the Rhodria cavalry. The soldiers could still grit their teeth and endure the hunger, but the horses could not. Due to the lack of fodder, we have already begun slaughtering the warhorses. Now we only have 16,000 plus warhorses left. We can only ensure that 8,000 of them are well fed. The rest, they have all lost weight. Their horsepower is also lacking. In other words, even if we were to go to war now, we only have 8,000 warhorses. We can only send out 8,000 cavalrymen. As for the rest, the warhorses do not have enough stamina. Forcing them onto the battlefield is a risk to the lives of the soldiers. The quartermaster's eyes were cold as he continued, "Even if you did not call me here for a military meeting, I would still have come to you to persuade you to retreat. We can no longer hold on here. It would be best if we retreat to the northeast and take down a town to replenish our supplies. Then, we will need at least 3 to 5 days of rest before our soldiers can recover to their peak condition. It can be said that, right now, our combat strength is at most 60% of what it was before the war. I do not know the reason why you, General, would suddenly issue such an order tonight. However, I must remind you that such an order is a risk to the lives of all our soldiers. We, the Rhodian Cavalry Regiment, are not afraid of death. However, we need a reason for our deaths." "Reason?" Roar gritted his teeth. Fatso's heart was suddenly filled with endless sorrow. "Reason? Am I supposed to tell these people that it is because the Crown Prince wants to go back to the city to be crowned? In order for the crown prince to go back and wear the crown, you all must die. Everyone. Just as Roar was about to bite his lips to the point of bleeding, the crown prince stood up. Garcia placed his helmet under his armpit and walked to the center. He then bowed deeply to the surrounding generals. The crown prince's bow caused the expressions of all the generals to change. They quickly lowered their heads. When Garcia raised his head, his face was frighteningly calm. His voice was not loud. In fact, it even sounded clear. However, when it rang out in this small tent, it carried a deathly silence. I know, saying such a request is very cruel. However, tonight I must ask you all to enter the city. For me. The crown prince's eyes were very cold. However, they emitted a resolute light. I must tell everyone the truth tonight. I received a secret message from the city. My respected father, the current emperor of the empire, His Majesty Cantos, is on his deathbed. Hua! The moment those words were spoken, the expressions of everyone in the tent changed. Garcia's face turned even colder. He raised his voice and shouted, "Everyone! Silence!" He suddenly raised his voice and shouted, attracting everyone's attention once again. Garcia straightened his body and shouted, "In this war, the key to victory lies with Osgilla. If the capital is defended, the empire will have a chance of survival. If the capital is not defended, it will be beyond redemption. After the rebel army takes over Osgilla, they will be able to march straight into the south. More than 10 counties in the south will be lost. The 1,000-year-old flag of the empire will be burned. Right now, in Osgilla City, His Majesty the Emperor is on his deathbed. If His Majesty passes away, the city will fall into chaos. The capital cannot be without an emperor for even a day. Thus, I must rush back to the city to take over the throne and be crowned as the new emperor. If I do not return, Osgilla will not be defended. If Osgilla is not defended, the empire will cease to exist. Thus, tonight, no matter what, we must march." When the crown prince spoke up to this point, everyone in the tent fell silent. They all looked at the crown prince with solemn eyes. Garcia bowed deeply again. At this moment of life and death, the survival of the empire lies in everyone's hands. No one said anything else. All the generals bowed deeply before the crown prince. When they raised their heads again, their faces were filled with determination. "Pa!" Fatso slapped the table and shouted, "Enough! Since the empire wants us to die, the Rodria cavalry will not fear death. Generals, listen to my orders." All the generals immediately straightened their bodies and faced Roar with unswerving determination. The second emblem group will go first. The spear cavalry will pave the way. Once the enemy is defeated, split up. The first emblem group's heavy-armored cavalry will be the second wave. Your mission is the most important. If the second emblem group is defeated, the heavy-armored cavalry must destroy anyone in front of them at all costs. The fourth emblem group will be mounted infantry. You will follow behind the heavy-armored cavalry. Your mission is to protect the crown prince. In the chaos, I don't care how many of you die or what methods you use. Even if the fourth emblem group is wiped out, you must ensure the safety of the crown prince. The crown prince is here, Osgilla is here, the empire is here. Fatso exhaled and gritted his teeth. The third emblem group, cover the rear. The third emblem group will probably suffer the greatest loss. There are not enough warhorses. I need you to replenish the first and second emblem groups with the best warhorses. When the enemy counterattacks, you must firmly block the pursuers. At this point, Fatso could no longer bear to look at the expressions of the generals. He turned his head and said fiercely, "You have 15 minutes to reorganize. When the bugle sounds, the entire army will set off. Everyone, in this battle, there will only be death. Everyone, fight with your lives on the line." The generals did not say a word. After bowing silently to Roar, they turned around and left. Looking at these silent generals leaving one by one, The Crown Prince Garcia's expression changed. He seemed to want to say something, but these generals did not even look at Garcia. They all left. Your Highness, or, I should call you Your Majesty now. Ruhr turned around and looked at the pale Crown Prince. There are a few words that I must make clear to you. General Ruhr, please speak. My entire army has been starving for almost a month. In my entire army, there are only 8,000 war horses that are still in good condition. I can barely gather 10,000 of them. 10,000 exhausted and starving cavalrymen, riding on exhausted war horses. Yet, without any planning or preparation, we have to attack the defensive line of hundreds of thousands of rebel soldiers. In this battle, the Rhodian cavalry regiment will suffer a great loss. It is not impossible for them to be wiped out. However, I promise you, no matter what, even if these 10,000 men fight to the last drop of their blood, even if I, Ruhr, die on the battlefield, I will send you into the city. Ruhr smiled miserably, but his smile was more ferocious than anything else. For us soldiers, it is our duty to die for our country. However, I ask your Majesty not to forget this day. Do not forget the blood that the Rhodian people shed for your Majesty, for this empire. Do not forget these 10,000 brave souls who fought bravely despite knowing that they would die. Garcia stood up solemnly. Then, he faced Ruhr and said, I swear once more, for the rest of my life, I will never forget this day. Ruhr stared intently at the Crown Prince before him, the one who was about to become the new emperor of the empire. He said, Your Majesty, please go prepare our luggage. I still need to pack up. After Garcia silently walked out of the tent, Ruhr sat down heavily. Fatso patted the fat on his face and suddenly smiled. He swore in a low voice before muttering to himself, Son of a bitch, I have been running my whole life, this time, I have to bite the bullet and run into the wall. This is not my Sir Ruhr's style. Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha ha. A sharp glint suddenly flashed across his eyes, and he shouted in a low voice, Reinhardt! Where is Reinhardt? Get in here! Outside the door, a young military officer wearing the uniform of the Imperial Guard battalion strode in. It was the young military officer from the Imperial Military Academy who came to Ruhr's side. Reinhardt, you have already submitted your resignation to me. Tonight, are you coming with us into the city, or? The young military officer looked at Ruhr. His face was solemn at first, but then he suddenly smiled and said, Your Excellency, please forgive me. I do not want to enter the city. Once you set off with your army, your subordinate had planned to leave this place on a horse and head north. Ruhr did not appear surprised at all. He looked at the young military officer whom he admired and said, He. As expected, you are a student taught by Cavalier. Unlike us fellows who only know how to throw away our lives. Your Excellency, your subordinate is not afraid of death. However, Mr. Cavalier had taught us that death is not scary. What is scary is wasting one's life without achieving one's goal. Your subordinate disagrees with your decision tonight and has decided to leave behind a useful body for the future. Leave behind a useful body, ha! Fatso raised his eyebrows and said, Are you not afraid that I will kill you now? Reinhardt's face was expressionless as he shook his head. If you do that, you are not General Ruhr. You are not worthy of Mr. Cavalier's special treatment of you. So, you have decided to go to the north and find that mad dog Green? Went to seek refuge with Xia Laming? The Crown Prince of the Empire is here. The Emperor is here. The capital of the Empire is here. As a soldier, you want to go to the north? Reinhardt's expression was calm in the face of such harsh questioning. He looked at Ruhr and said calmly, The Emperor is not the Emperor. As for the capital, it is just a city. Your Excellency's beliefs are different from mine. Your subordinate is not willing to be loyal to one person or one family. Your subordinate's loyalty is only to the country. Your Excellency is willing to bet the lives of all the soldiers tonight because you believe that the Crown Prince's ascension to the throne is important to the Empire. However, your subordinate does not agree with you. Your subordinate is different from Your Excellency. Your Excellency's loyalty is to the Emperor. Your subordinate's loyalty is to the country. Since the beginning of this war, your subordinate has long been aware of the royal family's plans. He suddenly sneered. His Majesty is willing to give up half of the territory in the north and half of the Empire's citizens. He is willing to throw them into the flames of war and only protect the south. This plan is indeed ingenious. However, if you think about it carefully, is this plan for the stability of the royal family or for the Empire? Since His Majesty gave up half of the territory in order to stabilize the royal family, this royal family is no longer worthy of your subordinate's loyalty and death. Ruhr's body trembled. He stared at this young officer. He stared at this young man who dared to say such disgraceful words. Ruhr's gaze was like lightning. Reinhardt just stood there and looked at him calmly. His eyes did not waver in the slightest. Ruhr lowered his head and pondered for a moment. When he raised his head again, his face was expressionless. However, his voice was urgent and fast. We are short of war horses. I can only gather 10,000 cavalrymen to go to war. There are other battalions and auxiliary battalions in the camp. In total, there are over 3,000 soldiers of various colors. There are also 3,000 to 4,000 horses. However, they are all weak horses. Even if our main force goes to war, these people will not be able to defend this camp. Once the rebel army attacks, this camp will be defeated. Otherwise, they will just scatter. I will give you a warrant to become the officer of my personal guard battalion. I will leave these 3,000 men to you. They will listen to your commands. Ruhr stood up and walked to stand before Reinhardt. These are the seeds left behind by my Roadrear cavalry. Rather than letting them be scattered here and swallowed up by the chaos, I might as well hand them over to you. If you have the ability, take them with you to the north. Go find Green, go find that kid Shea. Even though the 3,000 men had been handed over to him, this young Reinhardt did not show the slightest trace of pride or excitement. Instead, he sighed and smiled bitterly. General, you really think highly of me. He rubbed his nose. If I were to go alone, change my name, and travel stealthily along the way, it would not be difficult for me to reach Moore County in the north. But the 3,000 men you gave me to lead will be in enemy territory for thousands of miles. 3,000 weak soldiers to go through enemy territory for thousands of miles. You have given me a huge problem. Ruhr snorted. You are Cavishir's disciple and an elite of the Imperial Military Academy. This small matter should not be difficult for you. Reinhardt exhaled and finally nodded his head with a frown. Your subordinate will give it a try. Ruhr did not beat around the bush. He immediately bent over the table and wrote a warrant. After stamping it with the general's seal, he threw it to Reinhardt. Wait for my main force to leave the camp before you go and gather the men to prevent them from being disrupted. Also, don't let the other emblem groups know about this, especially His Highness the Crown Prince. Reinhardt was expressionless as he kept the warrant. However, facing Ruhr, he suddenly closed his legs together and straightened his body, solemnly giving a military salute. The young officer raised his head proudly and said in a deep voice, General, although I do not agree with your choice, I do admire your determination to fight to the death. If it wasn't for the other beliefs in my heart, I would also wish to stay here tonight and fight to the death with all of you. Reinhardt is not someone who is afraid of death. It is only because my belief in freedom has not been fulfilled that I want to stay alive. In the future, if we have the chance to meet again. At this point, the young officer's eyes were already red. He could not continue and simply clenched his teeth. Although it has only been a few short months, to be able to serve by your side and serve in the Roadrear Cavalry Regiment is the most glorious experience of Reinhardt's life. After saying that, the officer called Reinhardt had already turned around. With his head held high and his chest puffed out, he strode out. His footsteps were firm and he did not even look back. Rohr stood at the same spot and watched the young and heroic figure disappear outside the tent. Suddenly, he smiled. Roadrear Cavalry Regiment. After tonight, there will be no more Roadrear Cavalry Regiment in this world. Recently, I feel like I am getting more and more into writing. My condition is recovering quickly and I am in a good mood. Please recommend me. Please recommend me. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 367. 10,000 Words Explosion, Dance Vomiting Blood Requesting Votes. Recommendation votes, monthly votes, all are fine. Take as many as you have. GOR Chapter 347, Roadrear. Forward. Muffled thunder had been ringing in the sky for the entire night. The ink-like clouds were getting lower and lower. It was as if one could touch the clouds if they stood still and leaped lightly. Within the clouds, bolts of lightning flashed like silver snakes, followed by the sound of sighs of thunder. Hughes was galloping through the wilderness, escorted by dozens of knights' elite armor. There was a 5 to 6 meter high slope by the side of the road. Hughes whipped his warhorse and galloped up the slope to look into the distance. Looking at the location in front of him, Hughes couldn't help but gasp. He blurted out, "Danger zone!" At the foot of the slope, the rebel army of Armenia was marching quickly. At the front was an emblem group of light cavalry. They were all equipped with high-quality light armor produced in Armenia. This type of armor was made from light iron refined from iron ore produced in Armenia. It was light and sturdy. The army marched at night without torches. Looking at it from afar, the black mass of cavalry was like a river flowing forward. They were already 30 li away from Ostjila. The originally flat plains of Ostjila were gradually turning into small hills. Looking from the plains, these hills looked like small protruding hills. On the left side of the northwest road was the hill Hughes was standing on. The flat terrain on both sides of the road was only a few dozen meters wide. Further away there was a stretch of mud. That place used to be a river. Every year during the rainy season, there was an abundance of water. During the dry season, the river bed dried up and became flat land. Originally, the rainy season had just passed and the river should have been abundant. However, recently, hundreds of thousands of soldiers had gathered outside Ostjila city. The river extended all the way to the outskirts of Ostjila city. The hundreds of thousands of rebel soldiers used up the water, causing the river to dry up and become a stretch of mud. The dark clouds in the sky were thick. It was likely that a heavy rain was brewing. The air was humid and stuffy, making it difficult to breathe. Hughes fiercely wiped the sweat from his forehead and waved his horse whip. "Where are my heavy infantry? Where are the axes and crossbows? Why haven't they come up yet? Too slow, too slow." He looked at the advancing vanguard cavalry and whispered, "Send someone to the back to urge them. They are too far behind. Once the vanguard cavalry attack, the troops behind them cannot follow." How can this be? The elite knights behind him were all his personal guards. When they heard the governor's words, a few of them immediately galloped to the back to pass down the order. Hughes watched from the top of the hill for a while before he turned around and ran towards the back. The 3,000 cavalrymen were the vanguard of the Armenian rebel army. Before they set off, they had gone through many days of rest and were full of energy. Even the warhorses were full of horsepower after being rested for many days. Galloping through the wilderness at night, they were all full of energy. The lances in their hands were like a forest of sharp steel. Hughes had just rushed to the back when he saw more than 10 riders escorting a few generals galloping over. He immediately stopped them and shouted, "Why are you so slow? This person was one of the officers in the back. He had always been Hughes's trusted aide and was in charge of an elite heavy infantry regiment in the military districts of Armenia. The officer was annoyed when he saw Hughes and ran in front of him. He didn't wear a helmet and his hair was messy and sweaty. He shouted in a hoarse voice, "Governor! The cavalrymen in front are running too fast. Our infantrymen only have 2 legs, but we can't catch up with their 4 legs. We are heavy infantry. We can run with our arms open, but the soldiers' heavy armors, axes, and spears need to be pulled up by large carts. It just rained a few days ago, and the ground is soft and wet. The carts behind us are stuck and can't be pushed up. The weapons are all on the carts. We can't let the soldiers run up to the battlefield empty-handed." Hughes's face was full of anger. He shouted, "Bastard! What time is it today? This battle will decide the life and death of the Armenian army. If you dare to delay the battle and delay the battle, do you think I won't dare to cut you down?" He said fiercely, 15 minutes. If your troops can't reach here, don't blame me for being impolite." When the officer heard this, he could only suppress his anger. He waved his whip and whipped his subordinates a few times. He shouted, "Are you all dead? Didn't you hear the governor's orders? Go and rush them. Even if you have to carry them on your shoulders, bring the carts up." Hughes ignored him. He whipped his horse and galloped towards the rear. He took advantage of the night to mount a sneak attack. Although he was confident that he had grasped the best opportunity, as long as he succeeded in this battle, the Empire would lose its emperor and Ostjila would surrender without a fight. Although the roadrear cavalry was valiant, the other party had been here for more than a month. They were lacking in weapons and provisions, and were already exhausted. Furthermore, he had subconsciously retreated a few days ago to reorganize his troops and resupply them. Coupled with the advantage of military strength, the success rate of a sneak attack in the night had reached 80%. Roadrear cavalry? Humph! Could it be that they are made of iron? With the flames of excitement burning in his heart, Hughes rushed to the rear of the carts. The tens of thousands of men and horses took advantage of the night to mount a sneak attack, forming a long line that was impossible to see the head and tail of. The cavalry in front was charging too fast, while the infantry behind were lagging behind by an arrow's distance. Furthermore, they were lagging further and further behind. How could Hughes not feel anxious? After running for the time it took to eat a meal, he finally reached the rear. Seeing that the infantry was somewhat scattered and the officers were doing their best to urge them, the road was muddy and several large carts loaded with heavy armors were stuck in the road. The neighing of the horses caused Hughes to become furious. He jumped down from his horse, pulled out his long blade, and rushed to the front of one of the large carts. Looking at the officers who were shouting and arguing with each other, Hughes was unable to restrain his anger. He stepped forward and kicked one of them to the ground. Raising his blade, he chopped off the head of one of the officers. Hughes's eyes were burning with rage as he roared, "How important is the assault of an army? Why are you 2 bastards still quarreling here?" With his status as the governor, a group of elite knight had already rushed forward. Hughes angrily said, "Both of you bastards, chop off their heads and throw them by the roadside. If there are any delays, chop them off. In 15 minutes, the road was not clear, kill the platoon leader. The platoon leader died, the road was not clear, kill the battalion leader. The battalion leader died, the road was not clear, kill the flag leader of the emblem group. What Lao Tzu needs is time." At this moment, he was anxious and this aristocrat governor could no longer care about the demeanor of an aristocrat as he cursed out loud. He killed to establish his authority, and the effect was immediate. In a short while, the carts on the road were dragged to the side by the shocked generals. After the road was cleared, the carts continued to move forward. Hughes stood at the side of the road as a haze appeared in his heart. The Armenian army under his command, in terms of equipment, had high-quality iron ore produced by Armenia. Their armor had always been the best among the various military regions in the continent. The selection of the army was also the best. Their daily training had never been slack. Even the military pay was the most generous in the continent. He had never been stingy with high-ranking officials. But why was it that at this crucial moment, he always seemed to lack something? Tonight, after I have pacified Osgilla and built the kingdom, I will definitely build a real iron army. Otherwise, how can I, Hughes, who is full of revenge, realize it? Just as he was in a trance, he suddenly heard a hurried bugle call coming from the northwest side of the road. The bugle call was abrupt, as if it had suddenly pierced through the silence of the night. There was even a faint hint of panic in it. Hughes's face immediately changed as he angrily said, "Why is there a bugle call? We are attacking the enemy at night. If the bugle call is blown before we arrive, won't it expose the whereabouts of our army?" He was furious as he mounted his horse and shouted, "Send 2 people to the front? Quick!" The bugle call was issued by the vanguard cavalry regiment of the Armenian rebel army. The vanguard of 3,000 cavalrymen had already dragged the brigade behind them by nearly 2 miles. The general who had been leading the troops had some sense of propriety. Sensing that his troops were out of sync with the main force, he had the intention of slowing down. However, Hughes had just charged forward and issued a series of orders, urging the entire army to speed up. With this order suppressed, the cavalry general could only pinch his nose and obey the orders, desperately urging the cavalry under his command to hurry up. Finally, when they were less than half a mile away from the opening of the slope, they finally came to a slight halt. The cavalry general knew that this couldn't go on. The front and back of the troops were too disjointed, so he hurriedly sent someone to the back to ask Hughes if they should slow down their advance and wait for the brigade behind. The cavalry general who passed the order had been sent out and the 3,000 cavalrymen had already stopped. In the midst of their rapid march, they suddenly stopped. Their vision was not clear in the dark and the order was not sent in time. Suddenly, the 3,000 cavalrymen's formation squeezed together. The officers were busy ordering the soldiers to open up the formation. Suddenly, they heard a burst of thunder coming from the distance. The rumbling sound seemed to come from the horizon. In the wilderness in the distance, which was still dark, a flash of lightning suddenly flashed and the world suddenly became bright. The cavalrymen at the front of the line were suddenly able to see clearly in the distance at this moment. In the northwest direction, above the flat wilderness, there seemed to be a black hillside that was pouring down madly. Looking carefully, what kind of hill was it? It was like a tidal wave that spread out across the wilderness, like a stream of iron. Countless hooves beat fiercely on the ground, like thousands of drums beating at the same time. The rumbling sound had suppressed the sound of thunder in the sky. Cavalry! Cavalry! No one knew who was the first to shout out, but the commotion quickly spread throughout the entire vanguard cavalry regiment of Armenia. "It's cavalry! Roadrear cavalry! It's roadrear! The roadrear cavalry has come out!" The Armenian cavalrymen who were in formation were originally in a slightly chaotic situation. When the shout came out, panic immediately spread through the hearts of everyone. The sound of hooves in the distance was getting faster and faster. In just a few moments it was getting closer. "Line up! Line up! Line up!" The officers shouted anxiously and waved their whips and sabers, urging the cavalrymen to line up. However, the sound of hooves in the distance was like a death knell, getting closer and closer. Although the Armenian cavalrymen were well trained, they had not really fought many tough battles after all. Now that such a situation had occurred, even if the officers and generals urged them, the formation that they had practiced countless times and were already familiar with, could not be formed at this moment. "It's too late." The general leading the cavalrymen was a sensible person. Although he was also annoyed in his heart, his men were originally going to attack the roadrear cavalry. But who would have thought that halfway through, the other party had already taken a step forward and caught him off guard. Seeing that the vanguard of the roadrear cavalry was less than an arrow's distance away from his formation, there was no time to wait for the formation to be formed before charging. He steeled his heart and snatched the bugle from the officer beside him and shouted, "Arrow formation! Charge! Charge!" Immediately, he puffed up his cheeks and blew the bugle with all his might. Upon hearing the bugle, among the Armenian cavalrymen, the cavalrymen who had lined up in formation had already rushed forward. However, the cavalrymen at the back had not lined up properly and could only grit their teeth and charge forward in a chaotic manner. In the end, the frontmost formation of the 3,000 cavalrymen was still considered neat, but when they reached the middle, they became chaotic. When they reached the back, they were like a sheet of loose sand. The cavalrymen coming from the northwest were the roadrear cavalry's second emblem group. The 3,000 roadrear light cavalrymen were ordered to eliminate the enemy at the front. Not long after the whole army set off, a scout reported that the rebel cavalrymen had appeared in front of them. Before they set off, the officers of the 13th Corps were already aware of the danger of this battle. However, they did not expect that the rebel cavalrymen would actually reach them not long after they left the encampment. When the scout reported back and heard the news, the flag-bearer of the roadrear cavalry's second emblem group did not hesitate at all. This Empire's emblem group commander, who was already prepared to die, coldly gave the simplest order: "Charge!" The second emblem group, that was originally advancing at a slow speed, immediately got into position after receiving the order. Then, after a sharp whistle, they immediately sped up and galloped forward. It was only a distance of an arrow's distance, and the cavalrymen from both sides were charging at each other. In the blink of an eye, the two streams of iron collided head-on in the wilderness. At the place where the two torrents of steel collided, a dazzling metallic radiance instantly surged out. The thunderous sound of horse hooves suppressed all the screams and cries. Only a series of soul-stirring muffled sounds could be heard. In the first wave of collision, countless cavalrymen at the front of the line fell off their horses. The roadrear cavalry's formation was still as dense as ever. The vanguard formation was still intact. Even when their comrades fell off their horses, these valiant roadrear cavalrymen did not even spare them a glance. They just tightly crouched on the backs of their horses, gripping their lances and galloping forward with bloodshot eyes. The Armenian cavalrymen were almost unstoppable after the first charge. When the two armies collided, the Armenian cavalrymen at the front row barely managed to maintain their formation and managed to block the charge of the Rodrian cavalrymen. However, the Rodrian cavalrymen charged forward bravely and instantly sliced apart the Armenian cavalrymen. The Rodrian cavalrymen were no different from throwing a pebble into a river of iron, causing only a small splash. The Rodrian cavalrymen charged forward bravely and instantly sliced apart the Armenian cavalrymen. Like a steel knife cutting through soft butter, the Armenian cavalrymen went forward with irresistible force. The Armenian cavalrymen quickly crumbled. After the Rodrian cavalrymen pierced through their ranks, the Rodrian cavalrymen waved their sabers and reaped the heads of the rebel cavalrymen. The first wave of rebel cavalrymen who were knocked off their mounts did not even have the chance to turn around and escape. They were immediately trampled into meat paste by the cavalrymen who charged forward. Human lives were worthless at this moment. As the formation crumbled, the Armenian cavalrymen no longer had the courage to move forward. No one knew who was the first to shout, but countless people began to scatter in all directions. Some even turned around and ran, messing up the formation of their own forces that were charging up from behind. After the second emblem group's cavalrymen easily pierced through the enemy's formation, they immediately split up from the two sides. The cavalrymen waved their sabers and chased away the scattered enemy cavalrymen. Screams came from all directions, heads rolled, and broken limbs flew in just one exchange. In just one exchange, the 3,000 Armenian cavalrymen were reduced to nothingness. The roadrear cavalryman's bugle sounded. Under the urgent bugle call, the cavalryman gave up on chasing the defeated enemy and quickly gathered in the middle of the road and regrouped. Forward! The flag-bearer gave the order. My lord, the enemy cavalrymen are already here. There must be a large force in front. The flag-bearer of the second emblem group glanced at his deputy beside him and said coldly, We are the vanguard. After tonight's order, we will charge to Osgilla. Other than that, we have no other doubts. Even if there is a wall in front of us, we can only hit it head-on. If we are all dead, there will naturally be colleagues behind us to help us complete the rest of the task. Forward! Without reorganizing and cleaning up the battlefield, the cavalrymen continued to move in the direction of Osgilla. It had to be said that the biggest weakness of the original marching plan, the serious disconnection between the front and back, had saved Hughes at this moment. Although his Armenian cavalry regiment had been defeated, because they were too far away from the main force, it gave him a chance to catch his breath and respond. Hughes stood by the side of the road, his face already pale. It was not that he did not hear the sound of fighting in the distance just now, but the sound of fighting only lasted for a moment, as if it had suddenly erupted and then suddenly ended in a hurry. Too short. Too short. Hughes felt his heart contract fiercely. Did the front army encounter the enemy? Was it Roederer's scout team? But the sound of fighting was too short, wasn't it? Following which, he saw the subordinates he had sent out galloping over on horseback in a panic. Before they even reached him, Hughes could already see that in front of the main road there were about 7 to 8 defeated cavalrymen. They were his men. The defeated Armenian cavalry looked extremely miserable. Almost none of the cavalrymen were still holding weapons. Most of them just hugged the necks of their horses and ran all the way with their eyes closed. The disorderly defeated cavalrymen were only about 200 or 300 in number, but they were dragging their feet and the line was at least 100 meters long. Before the subordinate who came back to report could rush forward to report, Hughes had already rushed down on his horse. Line up! Quickly line up! The collapse of the cavalrymen in front was so fast and so sudden that it immediately caught the main force behind by surprise. Hughes roared angrily, and the generals under his command had already moved quickly. The carts that were originally delayed on the road were ordered to move horizontally at this moment. Urgent bugles sounded and the marching infantry were urged to assemble by the officers. The crossbowmen at the back were also pulled up. At the foot of the hill, the Armenian rebels seized this precious moment of respite. Laughably, this precious moment of respite was precisely because they had been too slow in marching. Over 10 large carts were strewn across the road in a disorderly manner. One by one, the infantry were forced to line up. Although the soldiers were still in a state of panic, after Hughes ordered the soldiers to behead tens of them, the formation was finally formed. Hundreds of archers were chased to the side of the small hill. All these preparations only took a quarter of an hour. Very soon, the sound of horse hooves could be heard from the northwest main road, as if it was a death knell. Where are the cavalrymen? Where is Lao Tzu's cavalryman? Hughes was already at the end of the formation. He already knew that the 3,000 cavalrymen in the vanguard had been wiped out. Under the rage in his heart, he had lost his rationality and calmness. How could the Roederer people know about his surprise attack? How was it possible for the Roederer people to counterattack before he did? How is this possible? How is this possible? Where is Lao Tzu's cavalryman? Hughes roared like a madman. His eyes were bloodshot. A general quickly grabbed his shoulder and said, "Governor, you are the commander-in-chief of the army. Don't panic." He forcefully restrained Hughes and said in a low voice, "2 cavalry regiments are behind us. They have already caught up." Speaking till here, the general couldn't help but add, "Tonight's attack plan was too hasty, Governor. Our entire army had been resting for too long. When the situation suddenly became tense, everyone was not used to it. The 2 cavalry regiments' war horses were not fully equipped. They barely managed to delay the time and ended up running behind the infantry. This battle is not fought like this. Hughes glared fiercely at this fellow. He took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. I was too impatient. But tonight's opportunity is rare and fleeting. All right, I will remember your words. He still wanted to say something, but the bugle in front had already sounded. Hughes's face instantly twisted. This was the Roadrear Cavalry's bugle call to charge. The Roadrear Cavalry of the 2nd Emblem Group had almost caught up with the defeated enemy. Looking at the center of the road ahead, which was not very wide, the rebel army's infantry formation was already in place. Although it was a little messy, its thickness made one's hair stand on end. The long spears were arranged like a forest, and the infantry in front had already erected thick large shields. In the face of all this, the flag-bearer of the 2nd Emblem Group still only gave a simple order. Charge! The urgent bugle call to charge sounded. The Roadrear Cavalry's cold eyes seemed to explode with brilliance in an instant. The enemy and the dense and thick formation in front of them were right there. There was no hesitation in the eyes of the Roadrear Cavalry. Forward! Forward! Only forward! The Roadrear Cavalry's bugle was blown. The wave of cavalry swept down, and the dense charging formation rushed forward. This was a torrential current. This time, the charge was not as easy as the previous one. As the cavalry charged forward, they heard a whong sound coming from afar. The experienced cavalry immediately understood that it was the sound of the archers' bowstrings vibrating. Many of the cavalry lowered their bodies and gripped the sabers in their hands even tighter. The archers who were hiding behind the infantry formation fired a volley of arrows. The arrows that filled the sky were as dense as raindrops as they smashed down upon the heads of the charging cavalry. It was as though a gust of wind had swept through a wheat field. Among the Roadrear Cavalry who were running at the front, tens of them were overturned and fell to the ground. Although many of the cavalry were hit by arrows, they still gritted their teeth and allowed the blood to flow out from their bodies. It was as though at that moment they could hear every other sound. No screams, no cries of pain. The only sound that rang out in the hearts of every Roadrear Cavalry was the loud bugle call. Roadrear! Forward! Forward! Only forward! The horses' hooves were like thunder and dust flew up. Boom! The volley of arrows seemed to have viciously knocked out a small portion of the charging formation of the Roadrear Cavalrymen. However, the formation was quickly dispersed. Such excellent horsemanship caused Hughes, who was hiding within the formation, to stare with widened eyes. The rain of arrows that filled the sky rained down, and the cavalry soldiers within the formation would occasionally fall off their horses. It was at that moment that a black knight in iron armor, who was leading the charge, suddenly raised his spear. There were already 7 to 8 arrows piercing his body. However, his body remained upright. Seeing that he had reached the front of the enemy formation, the spear abruptly swept forward. Instantly, a gray-colored combat energy spread out like a huge umbrella. The Black Knight's head slammed heavily into the first row of shields of the rebel soldiers. With a boom, the combat energy that was like an umbrella shattered the 2 shields before him. Several of the rebel soldiers who were hiding behind the shields were sent flying. The Black Knight took the lead and charged into the gap. His spear swept out and blood splattered out. Behind him, more and more cavalrymen charged up the shield wall. The first row of shield wall was thrown off their feet. However, more and more gaps were created in the shield wall. The first wave of cavalry soldiers who charged into the gap suffered the heaviest casualties. However, these Roadrear Cavalry soldiers did not seem to know what death was. The moment they charged into the gap, they swung the sabers in their hands towards the enemies closest to them. Despite the countless spears coming at them, they showed no intention of dodging. Even though their bodies were pierced, they used the last of their strength to urge their war horses to charge into the most concentrated area. Blood splattered everywhere. Everywhere was filled with slaughter and wretched cries. Countless broken limbs flew up and fell down. The torrent of attacks smashed into the infantry formation of the Armenian rebel soldiers, one after the other. It was as though a tidal wave was crashing against the shore, causing waves to rise to the sky. The first row of shield walls was completely destroyed in the first instant. The first row of shields was smashed into smithereens by the torrent of iron. The spear in the hands of the black-armored knight, who was the first to charge into the enemy's formation, had already been broken. He had already raised his saber and brandished it. Instantly, several heads flew into the air. The gray-colored combat energy was unleashed to its fullest. The war-horse beneath him was knocked over by the spears coming from all directions. The dark knight on the horse had already leaped off the back of the horse and crashed into the densest group of enemies on his side. His body slammed heavily into several spears. Some of the spears were blocked by the armor on his body and broke apart. However, some spears simply pierced through his body. The Black Knight frantically brandished his saber, cutting down the spears on his body. Then, with a loud boom, the gray-colored combat energy burst out. 7 to 8 rebel soldiers, both in front and behind him, were sent flying by the shockwave. Those who were standing close to him were instantly torn apart. The knight, who had suffered over 10 wounds on his body, finally knelt down. He placed his saber firmly on the ground and grabbed the horn on his waist. Placing it by his mouth, he blew it with all his might. Rodrier's horn. Forward! Forward! Only forward! The short sound of the horn rang out, and the figure of the Black Knight was instantly engulfed by the swarm of rebel soldiers. However, even more Rodrier-mounted soldiers appeared from the gap behind him. They followed the path that the knight had opened up and charged in. Carter Ryle, battalion commander of the 1st Battalion of the 2nd Emblem Regiment of the Empire's 13th Corps, a Class 4 warrior of the Empire and a 4-time recipient of the Empire's Iron Eagle Medal, died in the Battle of Osgilla on the 30th of May. Age of 30. Hughes stood at the back of the formation, riding on his horse. His face was pale and ashen as he stared ahead. He could not believe it. He had spent countless gold coins and used the best weapons and armor on the continent to build the elite Armenian army, a heavy infantry regiment of more than 20,000 men. Yet, they were forced to retreat step by step under the attack of Rodrier's cavalry emblem regiment of less than 2,000 men. The front line of defense, the square formation, collapsed one by one, layer by layer. Stop them, stop them, stop them. Hughes's body trembled as he mumbled in a low voice. In the end, his body trembled violently and his face contorted. Suddenly, he roared out madly, as though he wanted to vent out all the fear in his heart. Stop them! Just as Hugh's courage was about to collapse, a steady hand pressed down on his shoulder. One of Hugh's subordinates held onto the governor, who was on the verge of collapse, and said in a low voice, "My lord, do not worry. Although the front line has been broken through, the momentum of the Rodrier cavalry has been exhausted. Look, they no longer have the strength to move forward." Just as the rebel army general had said, the 2nd Emblem group of Rodrier's cavalrymen charged forward with their lives. Although they forced the rebel army's infantry to retreat step by step, breaking through several shield walls and phalanxes, and almost causing the rebel army to collapse, in the end, when the rebel army's formation became denser and denser, the cavalrymen seemed to be unable to move forward anymore. A stalemate. A deadly stalemate. The 2nd Emblem group of cavalry seemed to have sunk into a deep quagmire. The momentum of their charge had been exhausted. However, the rebel army's numbers were too many and their formation was too dense. Although they had broken through the front line of defense, the Armenian rebel army had not collapsed. More than 2,000 cavalrymen were entangled in the chaos of the rebel army. Once the cavalrymen were unable to charge forward, they could only fight on the spot and immediately fell into a passive state. Countless spears stabbed at them from all directions, and the cavalrymen could only swing their sabers with all their might. Although they did their best to cut down the enemy, there were also cavalrymen who were stabbed by the spears. "My lord, it is time. Counterattack!" The general slapped Hughes fiercely. Hughes gritted his teeth, his eyes bloodshot. "Counterattack! Counterattack! Kill off all these road-rear soldiers! Kill them all!" The general turned around and straightened his back. He raised his right hand and slammed it down heavily. Instantly, the group of archers who were hiding on the right side of the hill received the signal. Countless arrows shot out from the side, completely covering the battlefield of the rebel army. Originally, the road-rear cavalry soldiers were engaged in a fierce battle with the rebel army's infantry soldiers. Unexpectedly, the rebel army was so ruthless. They actually ignored the lives of their own soldiers in front of them and fired indiscriminately. Countless arrows rained down, and the soldiers who were engaged in a fierce battle were all knocked down. Most of the road-rear cavalry soldiers had lost their war horses and were trapped within the enemy's formation. They could only rely on the sabers in their hands to fight against the enemy. They did not expect the rain of arrows to fall upon them. More and more miserable cries rang out. Be it the rebel soldiers or the road-rear cavalry soldiers, they all died to the rain of arrows. In just the first wave of arrows, a large number of them had fallen. More and more of the road-rear cavalry soldiers fell. Gradually, the number of soldiers left was dwindling. Only a few managed to form into small groups, barely holding on. It was at this moment that a mass of silver light suddenly burst out from within the chaos. A blood-soaked officer wielding a long blade cleaved 3 to 4 rebel soldiers in front of him into two. There was not a single spot on his body that was intact. The hill armor that he was wearing was now in tatters, and there was even a broken axe embedded into his shoulder. The arrow shafts on his body were so dense that he looked like a hedgehog. Only the bright red cape on his body revealed his identity as a high-ranking general. Silver-colored combat energy swept out, and tens of rebel soldiers around him were instantly torn to shreds. Next, the general bent down and picked up a spear from the ground. Then, he viciously threw the spear toward the rebel army's formation. The silver-colored combat energy pierced through the spear, bringing with it a whistling sound. Like a meteor, it streaked across the rebel army's formation. Under the illumination of the silver light, a tall flag behind the rebel army's formation was pierced through, and the flag fell down. The general, whose entire body was bathed in blood, was already on the verge of collapse. Looking at the fallen rebel army's flag, he laughed out arrogantly. "Road rear! Forward! Forward!" His tall body fell down with a loud bang. Walters Casey, flag-bearer of the 2nd Emblem Regiment of the Empire's 13th Corps, 1st Battalion Commander of the 2nd Emblem Regiment of the 13th Corps, Deputy Flag-bearer of the 2nd Emblem Regiment. Before the Battle of Osgilla, he had accumulated merits and was promoted to the position of flag-bearer of the 2nd Emblem Regiment. A level 6 warrior, he had received the Empire's Medal of Courage once, the Empire's Silver Cross Medal twice, and the Empire's Iron Eagle Medal thrice. Died in the Battle of Osgilla on the 30th day of the 5th month. Age of 41. The sudden fall of the rebel army's flag caused the remaining hundreds of road-rear cavalrymen on the battlefield to become spirited. Hundreds of brave warriors charged forward in a frenzy. At the rear, the general of the rebel army had a cold expression on his face. He sat on his horse and looked forward. Suddenly, he sighed softly. Iron Army! Iron Army! Such an iron army! They wished they could die in the effort to expand the country's territory, but they died in a civil war. As he spoke, Hughes, who was beside him, Wu Rant's face changed. However, before Hughes could say anything, a hurried bugle call suddenly sounded from the front of the road. Following the sound of the bugle call, the thunderous sound of horse hooves could be heard. Judging by the sound, there were more than 10,000 of them. When the remaining soldiers of the 2nd Emblem Regiment heard the bugle call, they suddenly burst into laughter. "The 1st Emblem Regiment has arrived. Our heavy cavalrymen have arrived. Road rear! Forward! Forward! Only forward!" Hundreds of silhouettes seemed to carry the momentum of a magnificent army as they charged toward the rebel army formation in front of them. Behind them, under the cloud of dust, the black torrent was right before their eyes. The 1st Emblem Regiment, the strongest cavalrymen of road rear. Heavy cavalrymen. Thousands of cavalrymen formed a dense triangular charging formation as they charged forward along the main road. The sound of the heavy horse hooves almost caused the hillside by the road to collapse. A loud rumbling sound could be heard. The sky appeared to have been split open by a bolt of lightning. Following that, the dark clouds that covered the sky began to swirl. Strong winds swept up raindrops as they rained down upon this world. This torrential rain had finally fallen. Under the curtain of rain that covered the sky, there was a forest of spears, a mountain of iron hooves and a torrent of iron. Forward! Forward! Only forward! Vomiting blood, please recommend me. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 368. Cough cough, I know that many of you can't wait to strangle Xiao Wu. There's a reason why I haven't updated for 2 days. First, it's because of some personal reasons. Another reason, I made some changes to the plot that I had thought of before. It's very simple. When I wrote about Rodria's advance, my heart suddenly wavered. I really don't want this army to disappear like this. Even as some readers hope, I was also thinking, is there a way to let the country bumpkin bypass the Scarlet Snow Army and lead the army to Osgilla to save this Iron Army? To turn the tide, but after thinking about it for a long time, he still couldn't write it like this. Thousands of miles, and he still had to pass through the territory of the Odin people and the rebel army. With Xiaoya's less than 20,000 soldiers and horses, they were all pieced together. Unless a country bumpkin transformed into White River and single-handedly killed his way there. GOR Chapter 348 Dissipating Blood. When later generations of military historians looked back on the most important battle of this era, almost all military historians agreed that during the civil war of the Byzantine Empire, the most important battle in the Battle of Osgilla was definitely the Rhodian cavalry regiment's assault into the city. This extremely tragic and soul-stirring assault had been studied and described countless times by the later generations. After the entire process was reconstructed, there was almost no one who wasn't shaken by the courage and determination of the Rodrear cavalry to fight to the death. Although during this process there were occasionally some people who raised some doubts about the details. For example, the most prominent question was whether it was worth it to let an important army like the cornerstone of the empire risk the risk of being completely annihilated, with less than 10,000 soldiers or even exhausted soldiers, to attack an enemy army that was several times more than their own, just to escort their crown prince into the city to inherit the throne. Some people even thought that although the courage of the Rhodian cavalry regiment was admirable, it should be a meaningless sacrifice and not worth advocating. Or, there were some military enthusiasts who made various hypotheses. For example, at that time, if the Rhodian cavalry regiment didn't attack directly, but turned around, would they have a chance to avoid the rebel army, or rather, avoid the Armenian rebel army? Or perhaps, although there were many obstacles on land, what if they could choose to go by sea? Weren't there Lantis's allies on the sea route? In short, although such a sacrifice was commendable, was it a little foolish? Unexpectedly, among all the questions raised by these scholars, the first person to stand up and defend Rodrear's honor was someone no one expected. Reinhardt, who later became an important member of the military group under King Xiaoya's command. Later on, because of his outstanding achievements and outstanding military talent, he was known as the famous General Lion's Heart by later generations. The biggest stain in this famous general's life was believed to be that during the battle when Roederer's cavalry attacked the city, he didn't follow Roederer's main force to attack. Such a record caused him to be criticized for retreating before the battle for a long time. But when someone questioned the role of the Rhodian cavalry regiment in that battle, the first person to stand up and defend the honor of the Rhodian cavalry regiment and refute others was Reinhardt. A few years later, when Mr. Reinhardt retired as a professor of war history at the Imperial Military Academy, he personally wrote an article titled, "My Memories of the War of Defending My Country, the Afterglow of Roederer." In the article, he once wrote, "Perhaps in the countless maps that future generations looked up, countless information, and then spent countless time making countless assumptions, perhaps in such a situation many people could design more and better marching routes, and even design many different tactics in order to avoid the greatest number of casualties. They could use various ingenious methods to avoid the main force of the rebel army as much as possible. But I think these are all nonsense. Yes, gentlemen, these are all nonsense. Because at that time, when we learned that His Majesty Cantos was dying, we had to send the Crown Prince into the city in the shortest time possible. Therefore, the Honorable General Roer did not have countless time to look up countless maps and read countless information. At that time, he only had less than an hour. And in this hour, he had to make a decision that concerned the survival of the Empire. You must understand that at that time, we were stationed about 30 miles northwest of Ostjilla. The rebel army was all below the city walls of Ostjilla, and our forces were weak. Our scouts could not even cover a radius of 5 miles. We did not have sky eyes, so it was impossible for us to know all the details of the entire battlefield like the scholars who later studied the history of the war. For example, our eyes were blindfolded at that time. And the scholars who studied the war, after you looked up a lot of information, you clearly know the distribution of forces in every camp of the rebel army, and you know the advantages and disadvantages of every line of defense. But at that time we did not know these. Additionally, you can come up with all sorts of hypotheses. But at that time, for us, we had no choice. We had to succeed in one go, we cannot fail. Thus, General Roer chose the safest method, one that required the most sacrifice, force their way through. Using the peerless frontal assault ability of the Roederer cavalry, they used the shortest straight line to charge their way through. As for the hypothesis of using the sea route to enter the city, I prefer to call it a romantic fantasy. Gentlemen, please remember, the logistical equipment of the Roederer Cavalry Division does not include ships. At that time, the coastal docks outside Ostjilla city were occupied by the rebel army. To have us attack one of the docks first to seize the ship was even more risky. As for contacting the Lantis Navy, let's not even talk about whether or not we could contact them during that emergency. Even if we could, from a political point of view, we could not hand over the Crown Prince to the Lantis Navy. Although we were allies at that time, in the face of national interests, there is no such thing as an alliance that can be relied on. This article written by Reinhardt was included in the documents of the Imperial Military Academy's War History Collection. During that battle, the Roederer Cavalry Division suffered the most losses from the Second Emblem Group. The Emblem Group of more than 2,000 men defeated an Armenian cavalry division with great courage and strong combat power. Then, they forcefully charged into the Armenian Infantry Division's formation. Facing the enemy's heavy infantry division that was 10 times their number, they were able to force the enemy to retreat until they were on the verge of collapse. Although they were completely annihilated in the end, according to the statistics after the battle, the 2,000 Roederer Cavalry Division killed at least 6,000 rebel soldiers. Including the defeated cavalry division, the total number of casualties was close to 10,000. Research on the Roadrear Cavalry Division's assault was still ongoing. Some people even researched the route and distribution of the Roadrear Cavalry Division's troop. The 2nd Emblem Group attacked first, followed by the 1st Emblem Group. Then, the 3rd Emblem Group protected the Crown Prince and the 4th Emblem Group covered the rear. However, it was later found that General Rohr's military order at that time was, the 2nd Emblem Group can lead the way. If there is a setback, spread out on both sides and let the 1st Emblem Group's heavy cavalry division break the formation. However, when the 2nd Emblem Group faced the Armenian Infantry Division's dense formation and suffered a setback, they did not carry out this order. In other words, the flag bearer of the 2nd Emblem Group, who died in battle, did not carry out this order. He only ordered the troops to move forward. This detail had also caused a great deal of debate. The most popular point of view was that the commander's blind advance was too reckless. If the 2nd Emblem Group had spread out after the setback and allowed the 1st Emblem Group's heavy cavalry division to charge into the Armenian Infantry Division's defensive formation, perhaps the effect would have been better. Perhaps the 2nd Emblem Group would not have been completely annihilated. Although the 2,000 light cavalry were able to force the 20,000 heavy infantry to retreat step by step to the point that they were on the verge of collapse, such a loss could be avoided. Regarding this issue, the person who stood up to defend Roadrear's honor was an even more unexpected candidate, a general under the command of the Armenian rebel governor, Hughes. This rebel general later defected to the empire before the Armenian rebel group was destroyed. Later, after being tried by a military court, he was spared the death penalty because of his contribution to the rebellion. He was exiled to Sicilia for 15 years. Later, he was pardoned and returned to the country during the emperor's wedding. After this rebel general returned to his country, he had worked as an off-staff war history researcher at a military academy and wrote an article titled, "The Heavy Rain I Witnessed." In his article, he wrote, "When I saw 2,000 light cavalry soldiers forcing my heavy infantry formation to retreat, as a commander and general, I felt a deep sense of shame. The 2nd Emblem Group is the most courageous army I have ever seen in my life. Perhaps some people would think that it was unwise to use 2,000 light cavalry soldiers to attack the heavy infantry formation that was 10 times their number. Perhaps they could spread out on both sides and wait for the following heavy cavalry soldiers, but in my opinion at that time, the 2nd Emblem Group's approach was the wisest one. The terrain at that time was a muddy and half-dried river bank on the left and a hillside on the right. The road in the middle was only 50 meters wide. On the other hand, the 20,000 Armenian heavy infantry were equipped with the world-famous Armenian elite armor and weapons. In a terrain that was not wide, once the 20,000 heavy infantry formed a dense and thick formation, it was enough to withstand the cavalry's attack. At that time, the reason why Roadrear's 2nd Emblem Group was able to force the Armenian infantry to retreat step by step was not only because of their courage and combat power, but more importantly, because our infantry was not able to form a complete formation. When we received the news that the Vanguard Cavalry Regiment was annihilated, the entire army was shaken and their morale was unstable. In a hurry, although we managed to form a formation, we lost our sturdiness. It can be said that if the 2nd Emblem Group did not attack immediately, it would have given us sufficient time to reorganize our formation. Once we were given time to reorganize our formation, then, even if the Roadrear's 1st Emblem Group's heavy cavalry arrived, they might not be able to defeat us directly. Maybe they could, but the losses would be even greater. The 2nd Emblem Group's approach was not unwise, but they sacrificed themselves in exchange for the most precious opportunity. I respected the flag bearer of the 2nd Emblem Group. I thought he was an outstanding commander. He must have been sharp enough to capture the opportunity. If he had ordered the attack to be delayed and waited for the heavy cavalry to arrive, then it would have given me precious time to reorganize my army. But he did not. He gave the order to charge with the determination to die. Such an order did not give me sufficient time to reorganize my formation. Under the continuous attacks of the 2nd Emblem Group's cavalry, although they did not really defeat us, they had already made our infantry lose their courage. Following that, the arrival of the 1st Emblem Group's heavy cavalry caused this battle to end very quickly. It can be said that if the 2nd Emblem Group's commander did not give the order to charge immediately, then even if the Roadrear cavalry could have defeated my army, the losses in price we would have to pay would have increased by at least 50%. Until today, I still deeply regret it. Just like the words I said on the battlefield. Such an iron army could not open up new territory for the Empire, but died in the Civil War. It can be said that this is the sin of us people, and also the misfortune of being born in this era. This was an evaluation from an enemy general. Unfortunately, due to the identity of the author, this article was not included in the Imperial Military Academy's archives of war history. It was only circulated privately. The torrential rain continued. It was as if the sky had already leaked. The dense curtain of rain poured down from the sky, mixed with the thick and ink-black clouds, and from time to time, streaks of lightning flowed through. This night's massacre seemed to have turned the rain crimson. What a bloody rain! Hughes's entire body was drenched. The raindrops hit his armor and made pitter-patter sounds. The governor of Armenia's face was full of fatigue and panic. His expression was like a frightened beast. The rain had washed away the bloodstains on his armor, but his hair was still stuck to his forehead, drooping over his eyelids. Hughes's hand pressed on his waist. Unfortunately, he only had a scabbard hanging on his waist, and the sharp sword was lost somewhere. The leather boots under his feet were stained with red mud. Yes, mud, red. The rain seemed to hit Hughes so hard that he could not even straighten his back. He bent his waist like a weak old man, and there was no vitality in his sackcloth eyes. "Sir, in front," a voice came from the side, and then a barely stable hand supported Hughes, pointing to the front in the rain. Beside the small path, there was a small dilapidated house. The battered soldiers beside him had already run over, and someone directly kicked open the door and rushed in. Some of the soldiers had horses, while some could only run on their 2 legs. At this moment, however, everyone seemed to have forgotten the difference in status. Everyone seemed to be running for their lives, and no one paid any attention to the Honorable Governor Hughes. Only a few of Hughes's personal guards and a high-ranking officer in Chiu Shan armor remained. When they helped Hughes into the house, the defeated rebel soldiers looked at him with numb eyes. The high-ranking officer suddenly mustered up his courage and shouted, "The governor is here, are you all blind? 2 men, go start a fire." After he walked over and shouted a few times, the numb soldiers regained some vitality in their eyes, and they gradually gathered together. Under the orders of the high-ranking officer, they spread out to do their work. The fire was quickly lit, and there was finally some warmth in the damp and cold room. This place was probably a deserted inn originally. There were quite a number of such inns along the roads outside Ostjila city. However, after the war broke out, most of the residents here had fled, leaving behind only empty and dilapidated houses. One of the soldiers took off his helmet and collected some rainwater from the outside before burning it over the fire. Hughes sat in front of the fire, as if he had not recovered from his daze. The high-ranking officer beside him could sense that the governor's body was shivering. It was not due to the cold. Rather, it was due to the fear and despair that had yet to dissipate. The high-ranking officer sighed softly and patted Hughes, using his own body to shield him. Then, he whispered into Hughes's ear, "Sir Governor, please pull yourself together, the soldiers are all watching you." After repeating those words twice, Hughes's eyes finally regained some vitality. He raised his head and looked at the high-ranking officer beside him. Suddenly, the corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a miserable smile. "Soldiers, ha! Where are my soldiers? My tens of thousands of brave soldiers? All gone, 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 all gone, gone. Less than an hour ago, Hughes had seemingly just experienced the most miserable nightmare of his life. The Vanguard Cavalry Regiment was defeated and the 2,000-plus Roadrear Light Cavalrymen were in hot pursuit. His 20,000-plus heavy infantry soldiers hastily arranged themselves into a formation, blocking the middle of the road, and a bitter battle ensued. The 2,000-plus Roadrear Light Cavalrymen were able to force his 2 heavy infantry soldiers to retreat step by step, to the brink of collapse. However, by relying on his superior numbers, the 2,000-plus Roadrear Light Cavalrymen were finally unable to break through his heavy infantry formation. However, the courage and determination displayed by the Roadrear Light Cavalrymen caused his entire army to lose their courage. Next, another wave of Roadrear Light Cavalrymen arrived and the situation became one-sided. Originally, his defensive line was already on the verge of collapse. However, the next to arrive was the Roadrear Light Cavalrymen with the strongest combat power, the Heavy Cavalry Regiment. The first wave of attack tore a huge hole in their defensive line. As the hole got bigger and bigger, they couldn't even fill up the gap even when they tried to fill it up. Once they were defeated, the entire army would collapse. The charge of the heavy cavalry would instantly shatter several defensive lines. His infantry soldiers finally collapsed. Countless of them threw away their weapons and fled in a frenzy. As for the Roadrear heavy cavalrymen, they charged forward, unstoppable, simply unstoppable. During the most dangerous moment, the Roadrear Light Cavalrymen had already charged right under Hughes' nose. Thankfully, the 100-plus Iron Guards beside him were able to block them with their lives. The remaining men supported the completely collapsed Hughes as they ran. Hughes and his personal guards were all equipped with warhorses. Once they started running, they would naturally be able to run faster than the defeated infantry soldiers. As for the Roadrear heavy cavalrymen, they had to charge forward to slaughter the defeated soldiers. At the same time, the heavy cavalrymen's speed wasn't too fast. This gave Hughes the opportunity to escape. What happened next left Hughes unable to even cry. He led his men to flee. Halfway through, he encountered 2 cavalry regiments that had just arrived. As the order to march tonight was too hasty, these 2 cavalry regiments needed to reorganize their equipment before they could set off. Thus, they fell behind the main army. After meeting up with the cavalry, Hughes regained a bit of his courage. However, at this moment, Hughes had completely lost his rationality. In his madness, he committed another huge mistake. Like a gambler who had lost everything, in his haste to make a comeback, he had completely lost his rationality. Frantically, he gave the order. The few thousand cavalrymen beside him immediately charged forward. Within Hughes' crazed consciousness, he believed that the Roadrear cavalry was already an arrow at the end of its flight for them to be able to crush his infantry regiment. Now that he had 2 fresh cavalry units, if he were to counterattack, he would be able to turn defeat into victory. As a result, he did not listen to the advice of the people around him. After he gave the order to counterattack, he suffered an even more disastrous defeat. After the cavalry rushed forward, they did not immediately encounter the Roadrear heavy cavalrymen. Instead, they encountered a large number of defeated infantry soldiers. These defeated infantry soldiers were completely terrified. They threw away their armor and fled like crazy. Behind them, the sound of Roadrear's charge could be heard. Everyone had lost their rationality at this moment. The only thought in everyone's mind was, "Run." As a result, the frenzied routed soldiers rushed forward and scattered the Armenian cavalry formation. The formation was broken up by their own people. At first, the cavalry tried to shout to reorganize, but later they found that these defeated soldiers did not listen to orders at all. After the sound of Roadrear's charge came from afar, the Armenian cavalry general had no choice but to make a decision. He ordered his cavalry to wave their swords and clear the road. When the cavalrymen had no choice but to raise their sabers towards their own defeated soldiers, the situation became even more chaotic. Rodrier's cavalry immediately charged forward. The Armenian cavalry fell into the chaos of their own defeated soldiers. Under the charge of Rodrier's cavalry, they were completely defeated. Hughes completely collapsed. He had gambled on the last of his cavalry, but he did not expect them to be defeated so quickly. Fortunately, the generals and subordinates around him reacted quickly. They forcibly surrounded the crazy Hughes and hurriedly fled. There was no lack of clever people among his subordinates. Seeing Rodrier's cavalry galloping along the road, they quickly wrapped Hughes up and left the road. They fled towards a small path in the wilderness. Sure enough, Rodrier's cavalry did not seem to have any intention of pursuing them. Instead, they simply moved along the road in the direction of Osgiliath. At this moment, sitting in the abandoned house beside the path, Hughes was wrapped in a blanket. One of his guards had dug it out from the house. The blanket was somewhat moldy and had an indescribable stench. However, Hughes wrapped it tightly as he sat beside the fire, shivering. Finally, the water in the helmet boiled and a guard brought it before Hughes. "Sir, drink some hot water." Hughes raised his head in a daze and accepted it. Then, he drank 2 mouthfuls in a daze. It was as though he could no longer feel the heat. After swallowing 2 mouthfuls of hot water, this rebel governor-general suddenly straightened his neck. Pooh! He opened his mouth, and a mouthful of bright red liquid sprayed out onto the helmet in his hand. Specks of blood spilled onto the water within the helmet and gradually spread out. By spitting out blood, Hughes seemed to have dispelled some of the pent-up emotions within his heart. His eyes finally regained some luster. He suddenly loosened his grip and the helmet fell to the ground. This aristocratic governor burst into tears. "My army! My army!" Tonight, in order to seize the opportunity, Hughes had hastily marched forward. One of the cavalry regiments was the first to be defeated. Next, an infantry regiment with 20,000 soldiers was utterly defeated. Next, 2 cavalry regiments that arrived later were also annihilated in just one move. He had lost close to 30,000 men. As for the reinforcements that had arrived, without his command, coupled with the fact that the army had been routed, it was likely that they would also be routed and routed. The Rodrier soldiers didn't even need to wield their weapons, they just needed to ride their horses and drive them forward, just like herding a flock of sheep. The tens of thousands of soldiers that he had painstakingly built up in Armenia were equipped with the best weapons and armor. Yet, in just one move, he had lost more than half of them. How could Hughes not vomit blood? "Sir! Sir!" The general beside him held down Hughes and said loudly, "If the army is gone, we can recruit more. If the weapons are gone, we can forge new ones. Armenia is the richest country in the world. As long as we still have our territory, mines and population, we will not have to worry about not being able to raise an army. But if you fall, my lord, what will happen to us subordinates?" After being shaken a few times, Hughes gradually stopped crying. He was originally an outstanding person of his generation. However, when he was suddenly met with such a tragic fate, it was inevitable that his mind would be thrown into chaos. After he gradually calmed down, he slowly regained his senses. Raising his head to look at the general beside him, Hughes took a deep breath. He was silent for a moment before speaking out in a calm voice. "Send out all my guards. Everyone raise their flags and head to the surrounding wilderness to gather up the defeated soldiers. Also, how many mounted soldiers do we have?" "There are less than 100 with us," the general replied with a wry smile. "I will leave them all to you." Hughes gritted his teeth. "I will leave these mounted soldiers to you. You lead them along the main road. I believe that the Rodrier soldiers are already heading toward Osgiliath. If you go now, you should not encounter them. Go along the main road to gather up our defeated soldiers. Then, gather them all here. Seeing that the governor had finally pulled himself together, the people beside him finally breathed a sigh of relief. The general hesitated for a moment. "Sir, I have already sent out my men. You will need some men to protect you here." "Protect?" Hughes suddenly revealed a bitter smile. "I am already in such a state. What is there to protect? If you cannot gather up our men, even if Lao Tzu survives, it will be a dead end. Go. With the army, we will have a way to survive. Remember, hurry up and go." After his subordinates left to carry out his orders, there were no more than 20 wounded soldiers left in the dilapidated house. Hughes had already stood up and was standing at the door of the house. The door opened and the gust of wind from the outside gushed in. The thick curtain of rain between the sky and the earth had become slightly thinner. It seemed that after over an hour of pouring rain, the heavy rain had finally slowed down. Looking around, all he could see was a stretch of mud. Many places had even turned into swamps. Hughes's eyes suddenly lit up and he looked into the distance. Far away, in the direction of Osgilla, he saw a stretch of flames soaring up into the sky. Although the distance was too far and he could not see it clearly, the stretch of flames was very eye-catching in this dark night. Hughes slammed his fist onto the door and sighed. "Those roadrear mounted soldiers are already attacking our allied army's main camp." Sigh. "I was too careless, too careless. Since I am able to find out about the death of the old emperor, those roadrear mounted soldiers must also know about it. For them to charge so desperately towards Osgilla, it must be to protect the crown prince as he enters the city to inherit the throne. I made a miscalculation, just one misstep." Indeed, if Hughes had not urged the army to launch a sneak attack on the roadrear mounted soldiers, but had instead calmly arranged for the army to ambush Osgilla on the main road, Hughes gave a bitter smile and suddenly looked up at the sky. The thick dark clouds were beginning to disperse along with the rain. However, the faint rumbling sounds of thunder could still be heard from the distant horizon. "Heavens!" Hughes sighed, dejectedly holding onto the door. "Don't tell me you're still protecting this ancient empire? Heaven, are you still protecting Byzantium?" The flames in the distance lit up half of the night sky. Although they were far away and could not hear any sounds of fighting, when he thought of the fierce battle tonight, he could completely imagine what kind of fierce fighting was going on at the rebel army's allied defensive line outside Osgilla. Those roadrear mounted soldiers would charge at the rebel army's allied defensive line with no regard for their lives. They would not stop. Even if there was only one person left, they would not stop. They would not. That night, the roadrear mounted soldiers, with less than 8,000 of them, charged at the rebel army that numbered more than 200,000. The rebel army was caught off guard and hastily set up their defensive line. The roadrear mounted soldiers charged at them with their lives on the line. After 11 consecutive charges, they killed 14 high-ranking officers below the governor of the Carthaginian military region and 33 mid-ranking officers below the emblem level. The total number of casualties reached nearly 30,000. The entire 13th Corps of the Empire did not fear death and did not retreat. The rebel army finally lost their courage and broke through. The entire roadrear army entered the city. The Corps General Ruhr was heavily injured in 7 places. All the emblem-level officers under him were killed in battle. The entire army was left with less than 600 riders and more than half of them were heavily injured. On the same night, Emperor Cantos of the Empire passed away due to illness. The Crown Prince Garcia was crowned and succeeded the throne. He ordered that Ruhr be appointed as the Deputy Minister of Military Affairs of the Empire. Ruhr refused with the reason that he was heavily injured. During the coronation ceremony, the general of the Empire cried loudly after the ceremony ended, "The loyalty of Roadrear and the Empire has ended today with blood. Your Majesty, do not forget this day." After saying that, the general vomited blood and fainted in the main hall of the coronation ceremony. What was different from the coronation ceremony in the city that was dyed in the thick color of blood, yet the entire world knew about it, was that 30 li northwest of the city, at the same time that night, an auxiliary army of less than 4,000 people, all of their horses were weak. However, on this night, they quietly stood in the rain until dawn. The 4,000 soldiers took off the roadrier uniform that symbolized glory. Under the leadership of a young officer, they looked north. After today, there will be no more roadrier. Tomorrow, this book will be promoted. In order to make up for the 2-day break and to follow the momentum of the promotion, from tomorrow until the promotion ends, I will update 10,000 words a day for 3 consecutive days. Still, it can't be considered an explosion. It's just catching up on homework. There's one more important thing. Today is the big day for Jedi and the group. I send my blessings. I hope Jedi and her husband will grow old together and have a child soon. Also, don't forget to send me wedding candies. _carrot. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 369. I'm a little slow in writing, hee. 10,000 words delivered. 10,000 again tomorrow. Please recommend me. GOR Chapter 349. Blood sobbing song. During this summer, once the temperature began to rise, it would get hotter with each passing day. Last night it was still windy. However, when the sun rose in the morning, the temperature rose abruptly. By noon, even the air seemed to have become hot and dry. The warm breeze made people feel lazy, wishing that they could find a shady place to take a nap. This was the main road to the north of Ilton County. This road was built by the Empire several decades ago. Later on, it was renovated by successive governors and had become quite large. The main road that the Empire built between the north and south was originally built to deal with the transfer of troops and supplies from the south to the north during times of war. During the previous wars, the Byzantine Empire was able to continuously transfer supplies from the south to the north. This main road that connected the north and south was a major contribution. The location of Ilton County in the north of the Empire was somewhat awkward. The size of this county was about the same as that of Moore County. However, it was not as rich as Moore County. Moore County was located at the border. It had the advantage of border trade and was also rich in food. However, in Ilton County, other than the pleasant climate and abundant crops, there was nothing else to be gained. Most of the land in the north was flat plains. There were no large mountain ranges, so naturally there were very few minerals to be found there. However, it was not a border county after all. Food was abundant and it had always been considered a peaceful and abundant place. Speaking of which, the population here was slightly higher than that of Moore County in the north. Before the war, Ilton County was directly under the rule of the Empire's central government. It was considered one of the few administrative districts directly under the central government. Originally, the Empire's 7th Division was stationed here. However, a few months ago, the Odins invaded and the 7th Division was annihilated by Odin's Scarlet Snow Army. The entire Ilton County fell into the enemy's hands, and the peaceful and plentiful scene of the past could no longer be seen. When Odin's people attacked, the people were in a state of panic, especially when they heard that the 7th Division was completely annihilated in the Battle of Hilma River. The vicious Odin's people even slaughtered the captives, leaving no survivors behind. The water of the Hilma River was dyed red. The villages downstream of the river saw the corpses of the Byzantine Empire's soldiers floating down the river. Most of the corpses were mutilated, but they were swollen from being soaked in the river water. It was a horrifying sight. Later, there was a rumor among the people that these vicious Odin's people wanted to kill all the Byzantium people in Ilton County. Such a rumor made the people even more fearful. For a time, there was a large wave of refugees. However, Manning of the Scarlet Snow Army was not an idiot. He had some foresight. Among the barbaric leaders of the Odin's tribe, he was considered an outstanding person. After annihilating the 7th Division and occupying the entire Ilton County, he actually divided some of the Odin's troops into small teams to guard some of the mountain passes. He did not allow the refugees to escape and drove them back to their hometowns. At the same time, he also ordered his subordinates to restrict the plundering of the Odin's troops. Plundering was allowed, but they were not allowed to burn and kill wantonly. More importantly, rape was strictly prohibited. The Odin's people were barbaric by nature. Originally, they went all the way south and fought their way into the Byzantium world. The land of the Byzantine Empire was rich. After the prefectures and cities were destroyed, the food in the granaries piled up like mountains and the gold coins stored in the storehouses were enough to make anyone's eyes turn red. Looking around, the land here was so fertile. The men of the Byzantium were as weak as sheep, but the women of the Byzantium had delicate skin and beautiful looks. The barbaric nature of the Odin's people was unleashed. They even slaughtered some villages and towns. At first, Manning's orders were not carried out. Everyone thought in their hearts, "We fight to the death in war, we fight to the death. After the war, won't we be allowed to have some fun?" But who would have thought that Manning would be so ruthless? He sent out his personal guards as inspectors to patrol the land. Any soldiers in the Odin's army who disobeyed his orders were severely punished. He even chopped off some of their heads in one breath. In the end, the soldiers were shocked into submission. On one hand, Manning strictly forbade the migration of refugees and stationed small groups in various places. Then, he ordered the locals to seize the time and drive them away for spring plowing. In order to seize the time, he even sent out many soldiers of the Odin's army to strictly inspect the land. Even when the farmers were working in the fields, Odin's soldiers would hold whips and supervise them from the side. As for the conquered areas, no one was allowed to casually slaughter the Byzantium's civilians. On the contrary, he even gathered some of the surrendered Byzantium officials from Ilton Prefecture and collected a population register. After sorting it out, he registered it in a book. In response to the dissatisfaction and puzzlement of the tribe, Manning later explained, "Our expedition to the south this time is different from the past. In the past, we would just come here to reap some benefits and leave. If we burned or killed, then so be it. When the time comes, we'll just take the loot and bring it back. But this time, we're here for the long term. After coming here, we don't plan to leave anymore. The land, houses, and farmlands here will all belong to us in the future. Those brats down there don't know any better. If we burn or kill them, they'll all belong to us in the future. As for those Byzantium people, they'll all be our slaves in the future. If we kill them all, there won't be anyone left to farm. What will our soldiers eat and drink after autumn? Don't tell me we'll let the warriors of the Balshak tribe put down their battle axes, swords, and spears, roll up their sleeves and run to the farmlands to farm? They're all a bunch of brainless fools." Thus, everyone was convinced. After that, Manning made a series of moves. After finishing the spring plowing in a hurry, he sent people to select young men from the towns and villages. He ordered every household to provide one man. Any man taller than the wheel of a carriage would have to work as laborers. He had conscripted nearly 30,000 young and able-bodied men to build Odin's military camps in various places, especially along the main road in the southern part of Ilton County. Several checkpoints that had been in disrepair for many years had all been repaired. Some places had even been demolished and rebuilt. He had also built 3 large military fortresses in various key locations to accommodate his army. He had even relocated the local residents in the most fertile areas before conscripting the men to build new cities. The appearance of the fortresses was built in the style of the Odin people. This series of actions clearly indicated that he intended to station his army here for a long time. It was even said that Manning planned to send people back to Ilton Prefecture to relocate some of his tribe's population once the war calmed down. Originally, Manning's actions were carried out in an orderly manner. However, who would have thought that more than a month ago, Shea would sneak in with a group of horse bandits and instigate a conflict between the Odin people and the Corsica military. He even killed the eldest son of the Corsica military governor and framed the Odin people. As a result, the two tribes started a war. In Manning's anger, he gathered the Odin army and fought across the border. They occupied several towns and lands in the Corsica military region in one go. Both sides were locked in a fierce battle, which delayed his original plan to relocate his tribe's population to Ilton Prefecture. However, by the time summer came, many checkpoints had been built in various places. The construction of the new cities was still in full swing. It was said that Manning cherished the tribes in his country and hoped to complete the construction of the new cities before the arrival of winter so that he could relocate his tribe's population to the south for the winter. At this time, most of the Scarlet Snow Army's forces had been transferred to the Corsica military region. They were fighting fiercely with the Corsica military region's army. It was said that both sides had fought fiercely again a few days ago. Although the Corsica military was at a disadvantage, after the Odin people entered their territory, they also erupted with considerable combat power in order to protect their homeland. It was said that in the last battle, although the Odin people won another battle, they also suffered a great loss. The Odin troops left in Ilton County had been transferred again and again. Manning only left a few thousand men at the border checkpoint in the south to maintain his deterrence to the military region in the south. The Odin troops in all parts of Ilton County were actually very weak. Even in the places where the new cities were being built, there were only less than 1,000 Odin troops left behind to watch over the tens of thousands of people working hard. However, the people of Ilton County were already extremely fearful of these ferocious Odins. In particular, Manning's actions of slaughtering the 7th Division had left him with a fearsome reputation, so the people of Ilton County did not dare to even think of resisting. Moreover, the Odin people no longer killed people. They only ordered people to work. Although they were tired, suffered, and ate poorly, and would be whipped if they slacked off every day, at least they were still alive. However, as a result, a few of the densely populated towns in Ilton County had unavoidably fallen and disappeared. Manninger forbade the movement of people, and even the trade caravans from various places were restricted. Moreover, the large-scale recruitment of workers from various places caused the population to decrease tremendously. Many places that were originally densely populated inevitably became barren and desolate. Codal City was originally a medium-sized city in the south-central part of Ilton County. The city was originally named to commemorate a general named Codal during the founding war of the Byzantine Empire. The general was said to have been born in the grasslands here. He later joined the Byzantine army and made outstanding military achievements, becoming the founding hero of the empire. In order to commemorate him, the city where he was born was named after him. It had been passed down to this day. Codal City originally had a population of 10 to 20,000 people. There were large areas of farmland outside the city. The roads were smooth and there were also some caravans coming and going from the north to the south. However, it had become deserted now. Under Manning's high-pressure policy, 5,000 youths were transferred to the west to build a new city. Most of the people left in the city were the elderly, women, and children. Many farmers from the nearby villages outside the city were also recruited to build the city pass, leaving only a small number of people to look after the crops in the field. The road, which used to be bustling with noise and excitement, was now deserted. Even the tea shops on the road outside the city had mostly collapsed. There were less than 200 Odin soldiers defending Codal City. It was obviously not enough to look after a city with a population of more than 10,000. However, in any era and any country that faced a national crisis, there would be plenty of heroes, but there would also be plenty of spineless people. There were less than 200 Odin soldiers garrisoned in the city, but there were 500 allied troops. These allied troops were mostly the local poor families or street thugs. After Odin's people occupied this place, the original garrison troops were naturally annihilated. Manning even recruited some spineless officials and ordered some allied troops to be under the command of those officials who surrendered. At this time, how could decent people or those with a little bit of conscience and character be willing to be the accomplice of a villain? Moreover, after joining the allied troops, they would be facing their own people with a butcher's knife. However, there would always be some scoundrels and ruffians without a conscience who would pinch their noses and do such things. Anyway, there were still some military equipment left behind by the Byzantium garrison in the city's storehouse. Although most of the weapons were rusted and damaged, the Odin's people did not care about equipment for these allied troops. They were just randomly distributed to them to maintain the stability of the place. Of course, these allied troops did not have any military uniforms. Each of them simply wrapped themselves in a black robe, and that was their uniform. Therefore, in Ilton County, these heartless traitors were called black-skinned dogs by the local authorities. In Kodal City, the 500 black dogs were in charge of the city's defense. The 200 Odin's troops in the city were mostly in the original mayor's mansion. Summer was coming. The weather in Byzantium was hot. These Odin's people who came from the land of ice and snow in the northern kingdom were not used to the weather here. They were already used to the days of ice, snow, and wind. When they came to the south, the sun would make them melt. They would stand on the flat ground and do nothing, yet they would be covered in sweat in an instant. How could these Odin barbarians, who had been exposed to the cold winds of the north, endure it? In the hot weather, they all hid in the mayor's mansion to avoid the heat and rest. Even the reindeer were rarely brought out for grazing. Speaking of which, these 200 Odin's troops were all reindeer cavalry. However, the problem was that the reindeer mounts of these Odin's people were even more susceptible to the hot summer weather in the southern kingdom. Many of the reindeer fell ill, and those who were still alive lost weight. Many of the Odin's cavalrymen in Manninger's army had already changed their horses to become their mounts. It was close to noon now. Although the city gates were open, they were crooked. In the city tower, a few allied soldiers in black robes were sitting together to avoid the scorching sun. Some had rusty swords hanging from their waist. Some only had rusty shields in their hands. Some even took off their robes to reveal their thin and frail bodies. They stuck out their tongues and waved their hands to fan themselves. Manninger's order to restrict the movement of people was a smart one. However, when it was passed down to his subordinates, it became much more interesting to carry it out. The Odin's people were a barbarian tribe from the northern kingdom. Many places were still primitive. Even an Odin's hero like Manninger might not be very knowledgeable. He could only rely on his keen observation skills and shrewdness to make wise decisions. However, how could his subordinates know so much? Most of the Odin's warriors could write their names in the Odin's language. Less than 1 in 10 could write their names. As for restricting the movement of people, what kind of strategy could the subordinates come up with? The Odin's people didn't move. Most of the Byzantium officials who surrendered were yes-men and couldn't be bothered to care about these things. As for the black-skinned Byzantium spies, what did these local ruffians know? Since no one had any ideas, they might as well use the simplest and most direct method. Didn't they want to restrict the movement of people? Regardless of the strategy, the commander of the Odin's cavalrymen patted his head. Since Lord Manninger said to restrict the movement of people, we'll just order that no more than 100 people enter or leave the city every day. Great. There were still tens of thousands of people in the city. Although everyone tried their best not to go out during the chaos of war, who didn't have an emergency, who didn't have a headache or fever in their family. They had to leave the city to look for relatives, buy food, find a doctor, chop firewood to make a living. How could there be more than 100 people every day? And if someone died in their family, they had to be buried in a cemetery outside the city. They couldn't just bury them in their own backyard, could they? In the end, there were already people lining up at the city gates before the sun rose. No matter what kind of emergency you had, even if you were in a hurry to be buried because of a death in your family, if you didn't make it to the top 100, sorry, go home and wait. Please come early tomorrow. This kind of bastard order gave the black skin dogs a chance to profit. After all, these guys guarded the city gate. If there was an emergency, they would have to secretly give 2 or 3 copper coins to the people lining up to enter and leave, and it depended on the person's mood. At noon, these black skin dogs sat at the city gate. A fierce-looking guy was obviously the leader. Beside him stood an old man in a linen robe, carefully fawning over him. The old man fanned the old man with a piece of paper in his hand, and said a lot of flattering words. In the end, he stuffed a small pouch over. The leader squeezed the pouch in his hand, but seemed to think it was too little. He was instantly unhappy and turned to push the old man. He said angrily, "Do you think Lao Tzu is a beggar? This little money isn't even enough to buy a bottle of wine. Want to leave the city? Come early tomorrow morning." The few black leather dogs next to him laughed and pointed at him. At this time, on the road outside the city, a tattered carriage with crooked wheels came running, creaking as if it would fall apart at any time. What was even stranger was that the person pulling the carriage was not a cow or a horse, but a tall young man. He had a rope tied around his body and pulled the carriage, but he moved as if he was flying. The carriage behind him was long gone, but there were 3 people in it, 2 women and a man. When the carriage reached the city gates, it was stopped by the black skin dogs. "Aha! Business is here. Brothers, get up, get up!" A smug smile appeared on the face of the leader of the guards. A few of his subordinates jumped up and blocked the entrance of the city gate. Some of them even slammed the rusty swords and shields in their hands to intimidate the guards. The young man pulling the carriage stood in front of the gate and straightened his body. He didn't look at the guards blocking the gate, but turned his head and smiled bitterly. "Lord Shea, we agreed that you and I would each take turns pulling 2 li. It seems like I fell for your trick. I pulled 2 li and we arrived at the city gate. You clearly remembered the route and purposely tricked me." The man sitting in the carriage leaned half of his body out. He had a big waist, a strong back and a fierce aura. It was our Lord Shea. Shea jumped down from the carriage and patted Dax's shoulder. "You're right. I remembered the route and calculated the distance. 2 li is just right to the city gate. However, I was the one who came up with the idea, but you chose the order of who pulled the carriage first. If you had chosen to pull the carriage last, then you would have been the one sitting in the carriage." Dax snorted. "My injuries haven't healed yet." Shea ignored him and looked up at the broken city gates. We've arrived at the city of Keter. Then the road isn't too far. Sigh, if it weren't for these people, I would have been back in a few days." Shea stood in front of the city gates. He was a bit lazy from sitting in the carriage for too long, so he couldn't help but bend his back and stretch his arms and legs. He was tall and burly to begin with, but now he looked even more ferocious. Every movement of his carried a murderous aura. Originally, the several black skin dogs under the city gate were about to come forward to block the road and extort them, but when they saw Shea standing there with such a strong and powerful man, they immediately cowered. The leader was also quite tall. He patted the broken sword in his hand and gave himself some courage. Then he ordered his men to come forward. "Get out of the way, get out of the way! Who are you? Why are you blocking the city gates? Get out of the way! Otherwise, you'll be arrested as spies." Shea looked at the guy in front of him and suddenly laughed. "Huh? Are you the guards? Why are you Byzantium people? I heard that this place was occupied by Odin's people. Which family do you belong to? His words made the faces of the black dogs turn red. The leader of the black dogs flew into a rage out of humiliation. He pushed Shea's chest and scolded, "Be ****, I am the guardian of this place. Why are you spouting so much nonsense?" He pushed Shea's chest, but with his strength, how could he move Shea? Like a dragonfly trying to shake a pillar, Shea stood there without moving. He coldly looked at the guy and straightened his body. The guy immediately staggered a few steps back. The leader flew into a rage out of humiliation and raised his sword. Just as he was about to yell and charge forward, he was suddenly hugged by someone. He turned his head and saw that it was the young man who pulled the carriage. He didn't know when the young man had stuck to him. Dax had a gentle smile on his face. Although his face was covered in dust, his smile revealed a mouthful of white teeth. It was hard to get angry with him. How could the guy move when he hugged the leader? Dax laughed and said, "Don't get angry, old man. My friend here is a boorish fellow. Are you the guards? We just want to enter the city." Enter the city? The leader didn't care why he couldn't break free. He immediately shouted, "We can't enter. We only let in 100 people every day in Kodal City. If you want to enter, you have to line up tomorrow morning." Dax wasn't angry. He let go of the guy and took 2 steps back. The leader wanted to say something, but he felt something hard in his hand. There was something else in it. He looked down and saw a silver coin in his palm. They extorted at the city gates and could only get a few dozen copper coins in a day. This silver coin was already quite a windfall. The leader immediately smiled and looked at Dax. He smiled and said, "You're a very sensible guy." His eyes suddenly turned. He saw that although Dax's clothes were tattered, they were obviously made of high-quality material. From his expression, he obviously wasn't an ordinary person. Could he be a rich fugitive from a large family? In the chaos of war, wouldn't this guy be a fat sheep in his hands? In Kodal City, other than Uncle Odin, he was the only one who called the shots. These fat sheep delivered themselves to his door. If he didn't take advantage of them, wouldn't he be letting himself down? His polite words immediately changed. "It's good that you're sensible. However, there are 4 of you in your group. You have to pay taxes for 4 people to enter the city. And this carriage also has to pay taxes for entering the city. As for the head count, even if you pay for 1 person, you have to pay twice as much for the carriage." The carriage was tattered. Shea had casually picked it up when they were on the road. It was only to help the severely ill and unconscious crown prince consort settle down. From the leader's tone, he wanted 2 silver coins. This tattered carriage probably wouldn't be worth 2 silver coins even if it was dismantled and sold. Shea didn't say anything and just stood aside to watch the show. Dax sighed. He couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with these guys. He just didn't want to alarm the Odin guards in the city. He casually took out a few silver coins and said with a frown, "Gentlemen, we've been on the run for our lives. We don't have much money left. Even food in the city will be a problem." The leader snatched the coins. Although it wasn't as much as he had expected, he was still quite satisfied. He waved his hand. "All right, let's go in." Just as he moved to the side, he suddenly looked up and saw the 2 girls in the carriage. Daphne was still unconscious and her face couldn't be seen clearly. However, Adeline was sitting there and her face was instantly seen clearly by the leader. The heavens took pity on him. Although this leader was also a coarse and shabby guy, he had one thing in common. At least his sense of beauty was much clearer than Shea's. Adeline was a natural beauty. She had a head of golden hair and a charming face. No matter how you looked at her, she was a top beauty. Although her face was a bit dusty, the leader's body immediately went limp. He immediately stopped them. "Wait a minute. I think you guys are still a bit suspicious." If you want to enter the city, first we need to search you guys. I'll search the carriage. With a wretched smile on his face, he approached the carriage. Shea stood to the side and didn't say anything. He just crossed his arms and smiled. As soon as the leader touched the door of the carriage, his body suddenly flew up into the air. With a somersault, he flew over the heads of the numerous black dogs below the city gate. When he landed, his head hit the ground first. Suddenly, with a cracking sound, his neck snapped in two. He didn't even have the chance to make a sound before he died. The black skin dogs below the city gate were just some local ruffians. They bullied the weak and feared the strong. When had they ever seen such a scene? Seeing the person in front of them die in the blink of an eye, everyone seemed to be stunned for a moment. They were stunned for a long time before they let out a shout and were about to scatter in all directions. Dax had already turned around and rushed forward. He took out a large pair of scissors and with a few cracking sounds, several heads fell to the ground. Then, he raised his hand and threw out a handful of stones. Instantly, the few guys who ran far away fell to the ground, their heads split open. He raised his hand to kill. In just a short moment, the dozen or so guys below the city gate were all dead. Shea walked up and curled his lips. If you knew you were going to kill people, why did you waste so much time talking? You might as well have done it from the start. Dax frowned. Who knows how many Odin's men in the city? If they are alerted, we will be in trouble. Sigh. Shea laughed. Manninger is currently fighting with the Corsicans in the east. There shouldn't be many guards here. After saying that, he ran into the city gate and grabbed a person from the ground. It was the old man who wanted to go out just now. This old man had been pushed by the leader of the city guards. He wanted to leave but was unwilling to, so he sat on the ground and witnessed this scene with his own eyes. Seeing more than 10 people being killed in an instant, he was so scared that his legs went weak. He didn't even have the strength to run. How many Odin's men are there in the city? Shea pulled him up and smiled. Tell me and I will let you go. With that, he took out a gold coin and waved it in his hand. This is also for you. 200, Mayor's Mansion. The old man took a deep breath. He didn't know where he got the strength, but he snatched the gold coin and ran away. Shea looked at Dax. Did you hear that? It's only 200. You kill 100, I will kill 100. Let's finish quickly and have lunch. I am starving. Dax shook his head. I have already done my best. You go and kill them. I will watch the carriage. The mayor's mansion was not hard to find. Shea's killing at the city gate had alerted many of the black dogs in the city. But these guys were all cowards. Seeing the dozen or so people die, most of them fled. In the chaos, not many people thought to report to the Odin's garrison. Shea went straight to the mayor's mansion alone. He didn't encounter any obstacles along the way. He was amused. These Odin's men were too lax. When he reached the gate of the mayor's mansion, he could still hear the sounds of laughter and cursing coming from inside. The smell of alcohol wafted out. Shea wiped the corner of his mouth. Just in time for lunch? Lao Tzu is still hungry. He had the intention of catching them all in one fell swoop. He didn't smash the door and rush in. Instead, he climbed over the wall and went to the back. He saw the stables behind the mayor's mansion. In the huge stables, there were hundreds of horses and some reindeer tied up. But the reindeer were mostly thin and weak. They looked listless. Shea sighed. Lao Tzu wants to catch all of you in one fell swoop. You can only blame yourselves for being unlucky. As he spoke, he took out a bag from his chest and carried 2 buckets of water. He poured some powder from the bag into the buckets and then poured the water into the water trough. Seeing the horses and reindeer stretch their heads out to drink, Shea sighed. He only pulled out the 3 strongest horses and hid them at the door. After doing all this, he clapped his hands and swaggered forward from the backyard. The mayor's mansion wasn't too big. After walking through 2 long corridors, he arrived at the front. In the front courtyard, many of Odin's men were sitting in a circle. The smell of alcohol wafted through the air. There were a few empty wine barrels at the side. Many of the Odin's men were drunk until their faces were red. They had taken off most of their clothes and even threw their weapons to the side. In the middle of the courtyard, there was a roasted lamb placed on top of a fire rack. 2 servants who were obviously Byzantium were holding knives and were cutting the lamb piece by piece. But what surprised Shea was that there was a roasting rack in the middle of the courtyard. There was no fire underneath, but there was a person tied up on top of the rack. The person tied up on the rack was obviously not old. He looked to be less than 30 years old. His hair was messy, his clothes were tattered, and his body was covered in whip marks. One of the whip marks was imprinted on his face. Half of his face was stained with blood. Standing in front of him was one of Odin's men. He held a wine bottle in one hand and a whip in the other. After drinking a mouthful of wine, he brandished the whip and lashed the person. After laughing a few times, he continued to scold, "Sing again! Sing again!" That person was lashed again, but he clenched his teeth tightly. Although his face was twisted in pain, he didn't cry out in pain. Then, he slowly opened his mouth to speak to the 2 Byzantium servants who were slicing the lamb. His voice was clear and cold. Although it was a little hoarse, every word was clear. "The 2 of you were my father's colleagues and good friends. When the city fell, you wanted to save your lives. I don't blame you. My father died, and as old friends, you couldn't help him collect his corpse. I only said that you were cowardly and weak, and wanted to protect yourselves. I also don't hate you. However, in the past, you ate and drank as you pleased in my home. My father and I treated you quite well. Yet, you captured me and offered me to these Odin butchers. I don't understand. Don't tell me that your hearts have already been eaten by wolves?" The 2 men's faces turned red from his words, and they lowered their heads. After this young man finished speaking, his gaze landed in front of him. In the arms of one of the Odin's men, there was a Byzantium woman. That woman had gorgeous features, but when he swept his gaze over her, she lowered her head. "You are my maid. When your family was destroyed, I spent money to buy you back. However, I never mistreated you, nor did I bully you for your beauty. I even helped you find your lost brother. You liked my coachman, and I also helped you too. However, when I was hiding in the stable's cellar, I didn't expect you to bring these fellows to capture me. If you say that those 2 don't have a heart, then I'm afraid that you do. You have the heart of a wolf and a viper." The woman's face turned pale, but she quickly turned her head away. Odin, who was holding a whip, laughed loudly, cursed a few times, and then shouted loudly. Shea also understood Odin's language. He heard the other party's words clearly. "You Byzantium people only know how to curse with your mouth. If you really have the ability, then fight with your blade. You wouldn't have become the servant of our Odin's warriors. I heard that you are the best singer in the city. Our warriors are drinking, so hurry up and sing to liven things up. Otherwise, you will be whipped 100 times. When the young man heard this, he actually understood Odin's language. He replied, "I am a good-for-nothing. As the son of the governor, I only knew how to play in the past. I didn't learn martial arts like my father, but I loved to indulge in singing and dancing. Now that things have come to this, I can't even use my sword to fight with you. That is my own retribution. You want to hear me sing for you to amuse you? Fine. Then let's hear it. But you have to let me go first." When the Odin's people heard this, they didn't care. They only felt that the young man's body was weak and couldn't cause any trouble. They went up and untied the ropes on his body and let him down. The young man's hair was disheveled, his face was covered in blood, and his body was covered in wounds. Wu Ran turned his head and pointed at his 2 former good friends who had become the servants of the Odin's people. He then pointed at the woman who was being carried by the Odin's people. He suddenly sang loudly, There is wine and meat, many brothers, when have I ever seen one in distress? I hate that I ask the heavens to strike down all heartless wolves. He sang loudly as if he was weeping blood. His finger moved across the air, and the old friends he pointed at all lowered their heads with a face of shame. The young man raised his hand and tore his own hair. He looked up to the sky and sang loudly. His voice was indeed loud and clear. The wind is angry, the haze fills the sky, billowing in all directions, the fog shrouds the sky, the angry roar reaches the heavens. When the voice sang the heavens, it was as mournful as a beast's howl. At the end of the song, the young man suddenly let out a roar. He opened his arms and rushed to the side to snatch a knife from a servant's hand. The servant's face turned red from the singing, and he didn't dare to resist due to his guilty conscience. He actually let the young man snatch away the knife used to cut the roasted lamb. The young man held the knife and roared, "The country is broken and the home is destroyed, there is only death, only death." After shouting, his face was filled with malevolence. He turned around and fiercely rushed toward the Odin's people, who were holding the whip. Although there were many Odin's people in the courtyard, they didn't expect this thin and weak young man to be so fierce. Even the Odin's people who were holding the whip didn't seem to have recovered from the shock when he saw the knife in front of him. He just subconsciously raised the whip in his hand to block the knife. With a cha sound, the Odin's people suddenly screamed. However, the young man's strength was too weak. When the knife hit the Odin's people's arm, it got stuck and he couldn't grab it. When the knife fell out of his hand, the Odin's people had already recovered from the shock. He flew up and kicked the young man to the ground. He clenched his teeth and pulled out the knife on his arm. He fiercely chopped down on the young man's neck. At this moment, a red light suddenly flashed. The Odin's people's chest made a pop sound and blood spurted out. A flaming fork had already pierced his chest and pierced through his body. With a plop, the Odin's people fell to the ground. Banned 10,000 word update, please recommend. To be continued. If you want to know what happened, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 370. GOR Chapter 350, Wrong Shot. The flaming fork pierced through the Odin warrior's chest and nailed him to the middle of the courtyard. Such an unforeseen event caused many of the Odin warriors, who had been numbed by the alcohol, to wake up. Even though they had been living a carefree life these past few days, the warm winds of the south had rubbed their iron bones until they were somewhat soft, but the sudden sight of blood caused these valiant Odin warriors to jump up one after another. Those who pulled out their swords pulled out their swords, those who lifted their axes lifted their axes. As for the woman who was being held in the arms of one of the Odin warriors, she screamed and was pushed to the side. Because her body happened to be under the long sword of the warrior, the Odin warrior unceremoniously kicked her in the chest and sent her flying. Amidst the screams and cries, the door of the courtyard suddenly split into pieces. The wooden planks flew over and Shea was swept in like a ball of fire. He directly crashed into the chest of one of the Odin warriors. With Shea's current strength, he charged over at full speed. That Odin warrior felt as though he was being hit by a galloping horse. Crack! Crack! The bones in his chest were shattered and he flew backwards. In midair, he had already stopped breathing. When he hit the back, he knocked down 3 or 4 of his companions. Immediately they were thrown to the ground. 2 of them vomited blood on the spot and could not stand up anymore. After knocking away that Odin warrior, Shea had already snatched the warrior's battle axe. Weighing it in his hand, he was quite dissatisfied with the weight of this battle axe. At this time, the surrounding Odin warriors had already rushed forward with a roar. Long swords and sharp axes fell down one after another. Shea snorted and twisted his body to rush forward. Suddenly, the light of the axe splashed out a dark red. Blood soared to the sky and several heads and broken limbs flew up. Such a tragic scene caused the somewhat groggy Odin warriors to suddenly wake up. After all, although their minds were clear, their bodies were still somewhat out of control. They had the intention to rush forward, but after a hangover, their legs felt soft as if they were stepping on cotton. After running a few steps, they became somewhat unsteady. Shea did not stop. Like a fierce tiger pouncing into a flock of sheep, he waved the axe in his hand. Blood splattered everywhere and the axe flew. In the blink of an eye, there were already a lot of people on the ground. At this time, Shea's strength had already reached the level of a top warrior. In addition, he also had several sharp weapons. First, the dragon blood on his body, ordinary attacks were invulnerable. Second, the fire fork was incomparably sharp, ordinary weapons were invincible. Third, the army of destruction was an exquisite group battle martial technique. If it was a one-on-one fight with an expert, perhaps it would not show its power. But once it fell into a chaotic group battle situation, it immediately showed its power. In a moment, more than 100 Odin people in this courtyard had already fallen. These Odin people could be considered to be unlucky. Originally, they were drinking and having fun here. Most of them did not wear any armor. In the beginning, they relied on their natural courage and rushed forward barehanded. After more than a dozen of them were killed by Shea, their momentum suddenly weakened. Later, those who were armed were mostly killed by Shea. After all, the remaining people were not all brainless. Some of the Odin people tried to sneak to the corner of the courtyard. Some people even climbed over the wall to go out and ask for help. But Shea's eyes were very sharp. His speed was as fast as lightning, running back and forth in the courtyard. Anyway, no one could stop him. Anyone who wanted to run, he would catch up to them in 2 steps and chop them to death with his axe. But in the end, Odin people were killed by him until they lost their courage. Finally, after a few people around him were chopped to death, the remaining dozens of people looked at each other and suddenly ran in all directions. Shea somersaulted into the middle of the courtyard and pulled out the fire fork that was nailed to the corpse in the middle. With the fire fork in hand, Shea immediately took a deep breath. A red light quickly emitted from his eyes. The red light was awe-inspiring. Shea suddenly saw a guy kneeling on the ground. It was the young man who was crying blood and singing. This guy was knocked to the ground. In the chaotic battle just now, those Odin people only paid attention to Shea, but no one remembered to come forward and give him a stab. As a result, more than half of the Odin people in the courtyard were dead, but he was still alive. "Get down!" Shea's eyes swept over him and coldly spat out a sentence. The young man also faintly felt something and hurriedly threw himself to the ground, holding his head with both hands. Shea's mouth revealed a trace of a sinister smile. His eyes instantly turned crimson. Shea stood in the same place, holding the fire fork horizontally and swinging it in a circle. At this moment, time seemed to have slowed down a lot. In front of the fire fork, a red arc slowly separated chi in the courtyard. Dozens of Odin people were doing their own things. Some turned and ran towards the door, some ran towards the back corridor of the courtyard, and some had already jumped up and prepared to jump over the wall. After this red arc of light dispersed, suddenly, a red line appeared on everyone's body. At this moment, it seemed to have become silent. But then, screams and wails came from all directions. Some of the Odin people's necks were directly cut off on the spot. Some were cut in half at the waist. Some ran to the stairs in the corridor, but their legs were almost cut off at the base. Half of their bodies fell to the ground and they screamed miserably. Some had already jumped up and tried to use their hands to climb over the wall. But suddenly, after a red light, their legs were separated from their legs. After the red light dispersed, there was not a single complete person left in the courtyard. Shea stood up and smiled with satisfaction. With his current strength, the crimson murderous aura could already spread to a distance of 30 steps. Once the crimson murderous aura was released, there was nothing it could not destroy within 30 steps. One could imagine, if this kind of consummate skill was used in a chaotic battle, seeing that the courtyard was full of whales, but there was not a single Odin person left standing. The pungent smell of blood made the young man lying on the ground hold his neck and vomit on the spot. In the eyes of this young man, looking at Shea, he only felt that this guy who was covered in blood actually had a cold smile on his face. His eyes were frighteningly bright. Then, under the young man's respectful gaze, Shea walked around the courtyard with an axe in one hand and a fire fork in the other. Every Odin who was seriously injured but still hadn't died, Shea would go up and give them a strike with his axe or a stab with his fire fork, directly sending them on their way. After Shea finished walking around, he came to the side of this young man and looked down at him from above. Although this young man was full of courage and bravery, he had resisted for a while. But at this moment, after witnessing such a bloody massacre, his heart had already turned cold. Seeing Shea standing in front of him and coldly looking at him, his hands and feet suddenly trembled. "You are not bad. You have a bit of backbone." Shea grinned. His whole body was covered in blood, but his white teeth were exposed, making him look particularly ghastly. The young man felt his chest tighten and was lifted up by Shea onto the stairs. On the ground, there was an Odin warrior with broken legs, twitching and struggling. Shea stuffed the axe into the young man's hand. This kind of heavy axe used by Odin warriors made the young man's hand feel heavy. How could he lift it? With a cring sound, the axe tip hit the ground, nearly hitting his own foot. Fortunately, he held it tightly with both hands, preventing it from falling out. If you want revenge, do it yourself. Hoping that the heavens will send down lightning to strike these bastards to death? What a joke! Shea sneered proudly. Looking at the young man's eyes, he sneered, "In this world, there are many sins. There are too many who have committed bloody sins and deserve to be struck by lightning. Hoping that the heavens will send down lightning? What can those things do? With so many sinners, the heavens won't be able to strike them all. If you want revenge, use the axe in your hand." When the young man heard Shea's words, they were like thunder in his ears, piercing straight into his heart. Finally, he roared. His eyes were blood-red as he raised the axe with both hands and chopped down fiercely on the Odin warrior on the ground. Blood splashed and splashed on his face. That warm, damp, and fishy blood splashed on his face, but the young man suddenly felt relaxed. The blood of these Odin demons was hot, smelly, and fishy. It was no different from the smell of the slaughtered cows and sheep in the kitchen when he peeked at them when he was a child. Just so, with this thought, he was no longer afraid. He opened his eyes and saw that the head of the Odin warrior on the ground had already been split open by the axe in his hand. He was already dead. Seeing the head of the Odin warrior on the ground split open, blood and brain matter mixed together and flowing everywhere, the young man's face turned pale with fear. The axe in his hand was heavy, and he could not lift it. Just as he was about to throw it away, Shea had already reached out and supported him. The young man only felt that Shea's palm was broad and strong. He turned his head and saw Shea looking at him. "How is it? Does it feel good to take revenge with your own hands?" Shea looked at the young man. "Look at these Odin warriors. Although they are usually fierce, look at them now. When they die, their faces are still filled with fear, pain, and blood. In the end, it's just one life. If you kill them, then so be it." The young man suddenly let go of his grip and threw the axe to the ground. He plopped down on his knees before Shea and said loudly, "Sir, please let me follow you. My family is dead and I have nothing left to worry about. I just want to follow you and kill these Odin wolves together." Shea gave a cold harumph and looked around. He found a lighter-looking knife beside Odin's corpse and tossed it to the young man. "Take it. If you want to kill the Odin, then follow me. Remember, I only want men who are not afraid of death." If one day you become cowardly, then get the hell out of here. Tears flowed down the young man's face. I am the son of the commander of Kodal city's garrison. When the Odin invaded, all the officials in the city surrendered except for my father. My family's servants, including my father and his personal guards, were all killed by the Odin's men. I was hidden in the cellar by my father, who would have thought that I would be betrayed by my own family's servants. I am not afraid of death. I am only afraid that there are too few Odin's men. Shea nodded and pulled him up. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly heard a groan from the side of the corridor, followed by a low cry of surprise. Turning his head, he saw a woman lying on top of the corpse of one of Odin's men. It was the woman who had been kicked over by the Odin's men. The woman had been lying on the ground all this time, but she was still alive. Looking at the maid who had betrayed him, a trace of hatred appeared on the young man's face. But when he saw the fear and panic on the woman's face, he could not help but feel his heart soften. Shea stood beside him and said coldly, I heard what you said just now. This woman is your maid. You have done so much for her, but in the end, she betrayed you and sold you out to the Odin's men. Are you going to be soft-hearted towards such a vicious person? The young man hesitated. She is already in such a sorry state. Shea sneered. You don't even dare to take revenge. What kind of hero are you trying to be? If you can't be ruthless, you will be killed sooner or later. After saying that, he walked towards the backyard without looking back. The young man stood there, his face turning green and white. Finally, a trace of viciousness appeared in his eyes. He walked up to the woman and said coldly, I saved your life and have always treated you well. But in the end, you betrayed me. Such a vicious person. If I let you go, I would be a coward. After saying that, he stabbed her with his knife. Shea walked into the backyard and untied the reins of the horses hidden behind the door. Then, he saw the young man staggering out, the blade in his hand dripping with blood. Shea understood and did not ask anything else. He looked at him and asked, Do you know how to ride a horse? Seeing the young man nod his head, he handed a horse to him. Since you want to follow me, you must know my identity. Remember, my name is Shea Thunder, the county governor of Mo County. If you follow me back, you will not have to worry about not having the chance to kill Odin's men. After saying that, he looked at the young man. What is your name? The young man's eyes were cold. My lord, my life in the past was absurd. When my father died in battle, I couldn't help at all. I cowardly hid in the cellar. Now that my family is gone, I feel guilty. I don't dare to mention my family name anymore. From today onwards, I have no surname. My lord, please call me Kevin. That is my name. Kevin? Shea stared blankly and suddenly remembered the bald brother who had died in his arms. Looking at the young man, his eyes couldn't help but soften. Well, from today onwards I will call you Kevin. Kevin was the son of the city guard officer. The city guard mansion used to be his home, so naturally, he was very familiar with it. Under his guidance, the two of them searched around the mansion. Shea found some useful medicine and the like. Then, they returned to the courtyard filled with blood. He chopped off half of the half-sliced roast lamb and wrapped it in a piece of cloth. He carried it on his back. After thinking for a while, he also chopped off the heads of a few Odin's men. He kicked the bloody heads in his hands. Bringing Kevin with him, the two of them rode out of the city guard mansion and onto the main street. At this moment, the city of Kodal was still empty. The black-skinned dogs of the allied army had all run away. Under the pressure of the Odin's men, the residents of the city did not dare to leave their houses. Shea rode on the long street. There was not a single person on the street. Even the houses on both sides of the street did not have the courage to poke their heads out to see what was going on. Shea could not help but feel annoyed. Suddenly, he galloped his horse to an open space at the end of the street. He took a deep breath and shouted, People of the city, listen up. Right now, the Odin's men in the city have all been killed by Lao Tzu. As he spoke, he threw the bloody skulls onto the ground. The heads rolled far away. Shea shouted a few more times. Finally, some of the braver people in the houses on both sides of the street pulled open their windows and poked their heads out. Some of them saw Shea covered in blood and the rolling heads on the ground and shrank back in fear. Shea stood on his horse and shouted, "Kodal City is the hometown of the famous General Kodal who founded the country in the past. In the past, Kodal City was full of heroes. Who would have thought that today, the people here would be so cowardly?" He raised his voice and shouted, "There are only 200 Odin's men in the city, but there are tens of thousands of people in the city, yet not a single one dares to stand up and resist. May I ask if there are any men in Kodal City now? May I ask if all the men in the city, pull open your pants and see if that thing between your legs is still there? These Odin's men stole your property, stole your land, enslaved your brothers, and humiliated your wives and daughters. Tens of thousands of people in the city, yet you're just going to wait helplessly in the face of 200 bandits. Today I want you to take a good look. These Odin's men are not demons, nor are they beasts. They're just living people. They can kill, bleed, and chop off their heads. They all have hands and feet. If you don't dare to resist and hand your knives to others, then you deserve to be slaves." As he spoke, he raised his hand and pointed. "There are still weapons in the garrison storehouse. The corpses of the Odin's men are there. Touch your own chest, there's still hot blood in your chest. Go and get your own knives and swords. When the jackals and wolves come again, raise your arms and King fight them." After shouting, he saw that more and more heads were poking out from the windows and doors on the street. Shea snorted and looked at the young man beside him, Kevin, and said with a smile, "Okay, let's go." After speaking, the two of them spurred their horses and galloped out of the city. When they reached the outskirts of the city, and met up with Dax and the others, Dax saw that Shea had brought back a person and didn't ask much. However, when he saw the small half of the roasted lamb that Shea had brought back, his mouth watered. When he snatched it over, he used a knife to cut a few pieces and shared it with everyone. Shea had killed many people in the city and was awe-inspiring. However, when they reached the outskirts of the city, he suddenly became gloomy. Especially when he was delivering food to the two girls. When facing Adeline, this country bumpkin was always a little shy. Actually, on the way here, ever since Shea found out that Adeline was a girl, his attitude had undergone some subtle changes. Originally, the two of them were friends who had gone through life and death together. However, after distinguishing the gender, Shea became shy for no reason. Along the way, he seemed to be avoiding Adeline. Not to mention talking, they didn't even make eye contact. At this moment, he braced himself and delivered the roasted meat. Looking at Adeline's resentful expression, Shea quickly turned his head and slapped his head. You have blood on your body." Just now, behind him, Adeline's soft voice came. Shea nodded and said in a low voice, "It's Odin's people. I'm fine." Dax stood to the side and looked at this pair of infatuated man and resentful woman. He couldn't help but laugh. Adeline sighed in a low voice. "Just be careful." After a pause, she gathered her courage and looked at Shea. "Hey, country bumpkin, Shea's face was still tense as he replied in a low voice. Why do you seem to hate me?" Shea bitterly smiled and looked at Adeline. He stammered, "That? Adeline's face was a little pale. "If you hate me, Shea finally sighed, "I don't hate you." Adeline's eyes suddenly lit up. "You don't hate me?" "I don't hate you." Shea's tone was very firm, but then he frowned and said, I kind of hate myself." "Why?" "It's simple." Shea's face was stiff. "My mind is a little muddled. I don't know if there's something wrong with me or if there's nothing wrong with me." These words were a bit too deep, and Adeline didn't understand for a while. However, Shea didn't want to say more and brought the horses over. There were 3 horses, and one pulled the carriage. He and Dax each rode one, and the young man called Kevin was the coachman. The 2 girls sat in the carriage. There was no need to enter the city, so they bypassed Codal City and continued to head north. On the way, Dax deliberately had a sneaky look on his face as he rode to Shea's side and smiled. "Lord Shea, what nonsense are you trying to say? Or do you want me to kick you a few more times?" Shea rolled his eyes. "I just want you to satisfy my curiosity." Dax chuckled. "Her Highness Adeline is very beautiful, and she clearly has feelings for you." "I heard that the 2 of you used to have some feelings for each other. Why do you look at her like she's a ghost?" Shea's expression changed. He looked at Dax and finally sighed. "What's the problem? Maybe I can help you." "You can't help me." Shea shook his head. But he still raised his head and looked at Dax with a serious smile. "Do you have any good friends?" "I'm talking about men." Dax paused for a moment, then smiled. "Of course I do. For example, you. We've fought together on our way here, so we can be considered friends, right? It's not too much to call us friends, right?" "Alright, let's say we're friends." Shea nodded, but his expression was still serious. He pointed at his own nose. "Look at me, look at my face, look at my eyes. We're friends. But if one day I suddenly told you that I'm actually a woman, and the 2 of us should be together, how would you feel?" Dax's face paled and he almost fell off his horse. He quickly urged his horse to run away. But in Shea's mind, Dora was laughing so hard that she was about to stop breathing. Hearing the female dragon's laughter in his mind, Shea coldly said, "Is it that funny?" Dora was panting as she laughed. "Your analogy just now was very good. I just realized that you're a genius." Shea frowned. "Actually, it's not that I don't like poor thing. In the past, I couldn't help but think about her, but every time I think about her, I feel like there's something wrong with me. Now that I know she's a woman, I'm glad there's nothing wrong with me. But the problem is, when I look at her, I can't help but think of her when she was a man. This feeling is too strange." In the distance, Dax's ears perked up as he listened to Shea's soliloquy. He couldn't help but laugh so hard that his stomach hurt. He quietly rode his horse to the side of the carriage. "Your Highness Gentouet?" Adeline was feeling bitter, but when she saw Dax come over, she unhappily said, "What do you want now?" Dax leisurely smiled. "Your Highness Gentouet, if I say that I have a way to get that country bumpkin close to you, how would you repay me?" Adeline glared at Dax. "What can you do? That guy. He still thinks of me as a man." Dax snorted. "If I say I have a way, then I definitely have a way. But once it's done, how will you thank me?" Adeline's heart skipped a beat. Along the way, although this guy called Dax was a bit hateful, he was quite capable and cunning enough. Maybe he really has a way. What do you want in return?" Dax rolled his eyes. "Very well, stretch out your long legs and let me touch them." "Go to hell." The few of them traveled all the way north. Ilton County was now empty internally. Most of the Odin soldiers had been transferred to the east to fight the Corsican army. In addition, Shea and Dax were both people who killed without batting an eyelid. When they encountered a small Odin army, they directly slaughtered them. In addition, in the group, Shea looked rough but was actually cunning, and Dax was an overly shrewd guy. They were careful along the way, sometimes detouring around the main road. After traveling north for many days, they were still safe and sound. The young man called Kevin's injuries also improved a lot after taking medicine. This guy was originally the son of a government official, but he was unwilling to walk the right path since he was young. He had the style of a hedonistic son. As the son of a military general, not only did he not study, he also refused to learn martial arts. Instead, He liked to learn all kinds of things, such as singing and dancing, dog fighting, bird fighting, and even a good cook. Along the way, he had become their servant. When they stopped to rest, the cooking and cooking were all left to him. Even Dax couldn't help but praise the food he made, saying that if this was a peaceful era, this guy would be able to earn a lot of money by opening a restaurant. This Kevin was really a genius. He could sing and dance, and could imitate all kinds of sounds. To be honest, even Adeline could not help but say that if this guy was sent to the capital, he would be a good actor to sing opera. In particular, this guy was also very good at makeup. It was said that he could use his nose and close his eyes to distinguish dozens of perfumes and powders, but none of these skills were useful in war. Shea also tried to let this guy practice martial arts, but then he found that this Kevin really did not have any foundation at all. And after many years of being a hedonistic son, his body was very weak. How could he look like a son of a military family? But there is one thing, this Kevin has a fierce spirit. Although his body is weak and his foundation is poor, but every day when he stops to rest, he will fiercely train according to the military methods taught by Shea. His diligent spirit made Dax unable to help but be moved. Damn. If I had this kind of hard work when I was learning martial arts, Lao Tzu would have been a strong man by now. The journey was rather peaceful. The only problem was that the crown princess, Daphne, had not recovered from her illness. She was unconscious most of the time, and when she woke up occasionally, she would be in a daze. She would simply eat and drink a little before falling asleep again. The girl's body was delicate to begin with, and after suffering so much along the way, suddenly falling seriously ill was really a heavy burden. And if they wanted her to recover, they would have to find a place to rest for a few days. But now, they were still in enemy territory. Where could they find the time to rest? The journey was bumpy, and although they had an endless supply of medicine and food, but it looked like she was losing weight quickly. Her face was also getting paler by the day. During this time, Shea even took the risk of finding a town to kidnap a doctor, but he was also helpless. Thankfully, they were barely able to hold on. Finally, they passed through the northern border of Ilton County and entered Moore County. After walking for another 2 to 3 days, they were not too far away from Denzel City. Seeing Daphne's body gradually weakening, even Adeline forgot about her troubles with Shea. Every day, she would hug Daphne and quietly cry. Finally, one day they walked from morning to afternoon. Following the main road, they went around a hillside, walked through a forest and into the wilderness. Far in the distance, they could faintly make out the silhouette of Denzel City's walls. Finally, they were back. Shea's heart, which had been on edge all this time, finally relaxed. Along the way, he was not too worried about Odin. However, there was a hidden danger within his heart. Hastings, where did he run off to? After Hastings's change in temperament, he was finally chased away by Dax and Chen Xiaolian. Then, he disappeared and did not come looking for trouble with Chen Xiaolian again. That fellow, could it be that he really let me go and ran back? Regardless, they were finally back in Denzel City. Shea's spirits were lifted. He quickly increased his speed and his group made their way toward Denzel City. When they were outside the city, they encountered a group of scouts from the city. When the scouts saw Shea, they were all overjoyed. They left behind a few men to escort them, while 2 mounted soldiers galloped back to the city to report. Shea's trip this time was a freak combination of factors. They had been delayed for nearly 2 months and his heart was filled with anxiety. When they finally arrived at the city, they saw that the city gates were wide open and the military flag was fluttering above the city walls. Seeing that everything was fine, Chen Xiaolian finally felt at ease. From afar, he could see Green standing before the city gate. There was a solemn expression on his face as he led some military officers to wait outside the city gate. Beside him were 2 fellows. One of them had a skinny body with a wretched expression on his face. He was none other than Todoro. The other one had a simple and honest appearance. However, He was scratching his ears and cheek. He was none other than the young farmer known as Iranti. As Todoro and Elut stood before the city gate, both of them had different thoughts in their minds. When Shea was being chased by Hastings, he had parted ways with Todoro. He had ordered Todoro and Iranti to bring a carriage back to Denzel City first. When the two fellows returned to Denzel City, they were almost treated as refugees by the patrolling cavalry scouts. Fortunately, Todoro had been with Shea for quite some time. Sharba, Katua and the former mercenaries, Hakluso and the others, all recognized him. Todoro returned to the city and reported the situation to Green. When everyone came to know that Shea was with Hastings and was being chased by Hastings, all of them turned pale with fright. However, Green immediately issued a gag order to prevent the news of Shea being chased by Hastings from spreading. This was to prevent the morale of the army from being affected. However, Shea was not in the city. The morale of the people was somewhat unstable. This was especially true for the remaining soldiers of the 7th and 6th Corps. Green alone was not enough to command them. Moreover, Miss Nene was becoming more and more irritable every day because of Shea's disappearance. She led a group of mounted bandits to search the mountains and plains for traces of him. As for Todoro and Iranti, they became Miss Nene's punching bags to vent her anger. Nene's words were, "As the retainer of the Lord, he actually lost his master. It would be better to not have such a useless retainer." If not for Shea's sake and Sharba's and other old friends' obstruction, Todoro would have been whipped a few times. Iranti was the most unlucky one. This farmer thought that he had found a powerful backer. However, he did not expect Lord Shea to be missing. The time he spent with Shea was too short. Moreover, after returning to the city, he did not know a single person. In the garrison mansion, he became an idler and had to bear the anger of the Nene. These days, he lived in fear. Occasionally, when he went out, he would feel the unkind eyes of the mounted bandits in the garrison mansion. The poor farmer was frightened every day. He prayed to God that Lord Shea would be blessed by the heavens and return soon. Today, when they heard that Shea had returned, the two unlucky retainers were overjoyed. They did not need to be called, and even ran before Green and the others. They rushed to the city gate and stood in the wind, waiting bitterly. Both of them knew that they had been looked down upon in the city. Only when Shea returned would they be able to stand out. These two wretched fellows were equally shameless. They looked at each other and suddenly felt fear in their hearts at the same time. Todoro thought, "Lao Tzu is the Lord's #1 retainer. This newcomer cannot steal the Lord's favor from me." Iranti thought, "My newcomer has no foundation. I have to think of a way to perform well." Todoro stood there and thought hard for a while about how to express his loyalty. He thought of many scenarios and prepared many kinds of word. He had already sketched out the flattery in his heart. He hid in a corner and repeatedly recited in a low voice, When the Lord arrives, I must rush before everyone else and kneel in front of the Lord. I don't care about anything else. I must hug the Lord's robe and cry. The more I cry, the better. What should I say? What should I say? Oh right. I think there were some good lines in a book I read last time. Todoro grabbed his hair and murmured with his eyes closed, I look forward to the Lord like a baby looking forward to its parents after a long drought. I look forward to the Lord like a baby looking forward to its parent. I can't sleep at night. Every time I think about it, my heart aches like a cuckoo crying blood, cold and hungry. Todoro repeated it several times. He even thought about how he should cry, how he should express his emotions, and how he should express them. Only then did he feel full of confidence, seeing that Shea and his party had arrived at the city gate and that Shea was riding a horse in front of them. Todoro immediately put on a sad face and took 2 steps forward. He saw that Shea had dismounted and was about to rush forward. However, when he took a step forward, a leg suddenly stretched out from the side. The poor magician screamed and fell to the ground. He saw that his colleague, the despicable Iranti, had already rushed forward. The one who had tripped him was this abominable villager. Iranti rushed to Shea's front in one breath and knelt down with a plop. He hugged Shea's thigh and began to cry with tears and snot flowing down his face. "Lord, you're finally back. I look forward to the Lord like a baby looking forward to its parent. I look forward to the Lord like a baby looking forward to its parent. I can't sleep at night. Every time I think about it, my heart aches like a cuckoo crying blood, cold and hungry." His voice was mournful, but it made Todoro, who had fallen to the ground behind him, feel like the world was spinning. He was so angry that his nose almost became crooked. Damn it! These are Lao Tzu's words. This bastard, he even wants to steal Lao Tzu's flattery. Shameless, extremely shameless. Todoro was angry. He was even angrier that the trick he had painstakingly thought of was stolen by this abominable Iranti. Just as he was racking his brains on how to act, he suddenly saw Adeline coming down from the carriage. The magician recognized this princess. When he saw that Adeline was walking together with the Lord, he remembered that the two of them seemed to have an ambiguous relationship. Now, the princess actually came back with the Lord? Damn it! Since he couldn't flatter his master, Lao Tzu might as well take the wife's route. Thinking up to here, the magician quickly jumped up and shouted. He stumbled over and threw himself in front of Adeline. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Madam, mistress!" Just as he shouted, he suddenly felt a dense chill shoot over from behind him. Turning his head to look, he saw a tall and sturdy figure standing beside the many officers beside Green. It was Miss Ney. Hearing herself call out "Mistress," Miss Ney's face immediately darkened. Her eyes were about to spit fire. Did I flatter the wrong person again? Another 10,000 words. Please recommend me. Please recommend me. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.